Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. There are times when silence itself is the most deafening sound. It's as if the world around you is holding its breath, waiting for something to break through the stillness. That's how I felt the first time I saw the footprints. It was early December, the time when the cold wraps around you like a second skin and the world seems smaller, quieter. The city was blanketed in snow, every street corner and alley softened by the white dust, as though the earth was hiding its secrets beneath layers of ice. The kind of snow that looked so pure, so pristine, that it made everything else seem wrong, out of place. I had been walking home, just another tired commuter trying to make it through another long day at the small cafe I worked at. My breath came out in puffs, clouds of white, mixing with the steam from the coffee I had spilled on my coat earlier. I wasn't looking for anything unusual. I had walked this route 1,000 times before, each step heavy with the familiarity of the streets. But then I saw it. The trail. At first, I thought it was just a regular set of footprints, just another person who had walked this path before me, disappearing into the vast white landscape. But as I looked closer, my breath caught in my throat. The footprints weren't human. Not entirely. They were too wide, too deep. And they weren't aligned in a natural stride, more like the marks of something dragging, scraping, as if something had been pulled along the snow. My heart thudded. I knelt down to inspect them, the cold biting through my gloves, and that's when I saw it, the strange pattern etched into the edges of the footprints. They weren't just random impressions in the snow. They were deliberate, precise. I should have turned around. I should have gone back. But instead, my curiosity tugged at me, pulling me deeper into the silent night. I followed the tracks. With every step, the air grew colder, and the feeling of being watched pressed harder on my chest. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking just beyond my sight. The streetlights seemed farther away, their soft glow not quite reaching the darkness that began to stretch out around me, as though the shadows themselves were alive, growing, creeping. And then I heard it. A sound. A faint scraping, like metal against metal. It was so quiet at first, I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. I stopped, straining my ears in the eerie stillness. The noise came again, closer this time, sharper. It was like something was dragging along the ground, something heavy, something unwilling. My feet moved of their own accord, carried by an unsettling compulsion. The footprints led me to a narrow alleyway between two old, crumbling buildings. The walls on either side seemed to lean in, like they were watching me, listening. I hesitated, feeling the breath of the night on my neck, but the tracks were still there, beckoning. I stepped forward. The alley smelled of decay, a mix of old wood, damp stone, and something else, something metallic. The scraping noise grew louder. It was right behind me now. I couldn't move. My body felt like it had turned to stone. I glanced over my shoulder, my heart pounding. But there was nothing there. Just the emptiness. Then I saw it, at the far end of the alley. The final set of footprints, leading to a patch of snow that hadn't been disturbed. But something was wrong about it. The snow around the mark was shifting, moving. I approached it slowly, my breath coming faster now. The scraping sound stopped. Complete silence. And then I saw them. Footprints, dozens of them, some deeper than others, like something large and heavy had stepped here. And in the center of that patch of disturbed snow, there was something else. A symbol. A strange, jagged shape, like a rune carved into the ground. My mind was racing. The symbol looked old, ancient even, but somehow it felt familiar. A shiver ran down my spine. I was not alone in this alley. Something was watching me, and the sense of danger was suffocating. I took a step back, and that's when I heard it again, the sound of something scraping, closer this time. I didn't look. I couldn't. I turned and ran. My footsteps echoed against the walls, the cold biting at my skin, but I didn't dare stop. The air had thickened, the world narrowing until it felt like I was running through a tunnel of snow. The street stretched out before me, but I could see nothing, only a void of endless white. I reached the end of the alley, panting, my heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I realized it. The tracks were gone. There was nothing. Just empty snow, as if the footprints had never existed. But I knew they had been there. The cold wasn't just from the weather. It was something else, something older, buried deep in the earth beneath the city. And whatever had left those tracks, it was still there, watching, waiting. I glanced over my shoulder once more. Nothing. But the scrape of metal on ice lingered in my ears. The city was too quiet that night. The snow, which had earlier felt like a blanket of innocence, now seemed oppressive. Thick and heavy, it hung in the air, clinging to the edges of the streets like some unnatural presence. I could feel it, the weight of it all pressing down on me, the cold sinking deeper into my bones than any frost should. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tracks again. The way they twisted and turned, leading into the unknown, pulling me closer, dragging me deeper into that thick, suffocating silence. The scraping sound echoed in my mind. That strange, unnerving sensation that I was being watched, that I was no longer alone in my own home. It was as if something had crossed the threshold of my thoughts and was now lingering just beyond my sight. By morning, the snow had settled, and the world outside was a pristine white. But that was the problem. It was too perfect. I had grown up in this city, walked these streets all my life, and I knew the snow didn't settle like this. It didn't stay undisturbed for long. There was always the mark of life, the trail of someone or something passing through it. But here, in the aftermath of the night's chill, everything was too still, too quiet. I tried to push the thoughts from my mind. I told myself that it was nothing, just a strange occurrence, a trick of the cold, of fatigue. But every time I passed the window, the shadow of the alley where the footprints had led me seemed to stretch longer, more ominous. And the scraping sound, that God-forsaken scraping sound, never quite left my mind. It wasn't until later that afternoon that things took a turn. I had been walking to work, my footsteps crunching through the new layer of snow, when I saw it again. A single set of footprints, fresh, leading off the beaten path and into the woods that bordered the city. My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to walk away, forget all about it, but something pulled at me. A curiosity that was far too deep, far too irresistible. I couldn't stop myself. I followed the trail. The woods were a different world entirely. Even in daylight, the trees seemed to press in close, their limbs heavy with snow, as though the branches were reaching toward me. The sky above was gray and oppressive, The light from the weak sun filtered through the dense canopy of branches, casting everything in a muted, ashen hue. My breath misted in the cold air, hanging in front of me like the ghosts of forgotten memories. The further I went, the more I felt the weight of something watching me, something ancient. It wasn't just the woods that felt wrong, it was the air itself, thick with an oppressive energy that tugged at my chest, made my lungs ache with each breath. I could hear it now, faint, but growing louder with each step. The scraping. It was a low, guttural sound, like ice against metal, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. My pulse quickened, and a chill more profound than the winter air washed over me. Then, I saw them. The footprints were clearer now, deeper, more pronounced. But these weren't the same tracks I had followed before. These were different. They seemed to drag, as if something heavy was being pulled through the snow. And with each new set of footprints, the temperature seemed to drop. I stumbled, the realization creeping into my mind, slowly but inevitably, those weren't just footprints. They were marks of something, or someone, dragging itself through the snow, leaving behind its twisted path, as though it had crawled from some other place. The ground was disturbed, the snow pulled away in irregular patches. Then I heard it again, closer now. The scrape. The sound of something shifting in the distance. It was followed by a soft rustling, like the wind, but there was no wind here. The trees were still. The world was still. But the noise wasn't still. I glanced over my shoulder, my breath shallow, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move in the corner of my eye. My heart pounded in my chest, and I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was frozen in place, the cold gripping me like icy hands. And then I saw it. At the end of the trail, at the edge of the trees, a figure stood. But it wasn't a person. Not entirely. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed to bend in unnatural angles. The figure was shrouded in shadows, its outline indistinct, like smoke or fog, as if it existed just beyond the edges of reality. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its eyes. I could feel them, burrowing into me like a weight, like a crushing pressure against my mind. The scraping sound stopped. I wanted to scream, but my throat had gone dry. My feet were glued to the spot, my entire body frozen in a terror so deep, so primal, that I couldn't even breathe. The figure stood motionless, watching me, as if it were deciding what to do next. The snow beneath my feet creaked. I turned my head to look, but the moment I did, the figure moved. It didn't walk. It slid, gliding silently over the snow toward me, faster than anything should move in that deep of a chill. I didn't wait to see more. I didn't need to. I ran. My legs burned, and my lungs felt like they were going to burst, but I couldn't stop. The path ahead was a blur, the trees bending with every stride as though they were closing in on me. Behind me, the scraping noise began again, louder now, more urgent. The figure was following me. I was almost back to the city's edge when the ground beneath my feet gave way. My foot caught in something hidden beneath the snow. I fell hard, the wind knocked out of me, and before I could recover, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, scraping closer with every second. I pushed myself up, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but when I looked around, the figure was gone. The snow was still. The trail of footprints was gone. But the weight of the cold, the feeling that something was watching, something that shouldn't exist, lingered. It stayed with me, gnawing at my insides like a sickness I couldn't shake. I thought I was safe. I thought it was over. But I was wrong. because the curse had only just begun. I thought I had escaped, but the city felt different now. The air was heavier, the streets somehow more oppressive, as though the world had shifted, and I was no longer a part of it. I could still hear the scraping sound, even while I was indoors, even when I closed my eyes to sleep. It was as if it had followed me home. The shadows that danced across my apartment's walls seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching into the corners where the light didn't touch. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting, watching. That night, the dream came again. The one where I was standing in the woods, the snow falling in endless, slow-motion flakes, thick and heavy, blanketing the earth. The trees, tall and ancient, towered over me, their branches thick with the weight of the frost. I could hear the wind, soft at first, but it grew louder, rising like a whispering voice, and then I felt the presence. That same presence. The cold that wasn't just from the air. No, this was something deeper, something that gripped you from the inside out. It spread like ice through your veins, suffocating you with its stillness, with its silence. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. My feet were frozen to the ground. The scraping sound was getting closer, louder now, scraping over the frozen ground with a maddening rhythm. Then it appeared. The figure. But it was different this time. It was no longer shrouded in the fog-like shadow, no longer something indistinct. Now, I could see it clearly, every horrifying detail. It was gaunt, skin pulled tight over bones that seemed far too sharp, far too brittle. Its arms were long, far longer than should be humanly possible, ending in fingers that looked like they were made of ice, brittle and sharp. The face, God, the face. It was a mask, hollowed out, empty, like the space where a soul should have been scooped out. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were black holes, endless and deep, sucking in every shred of warmth and light around them. It didn't speak, but I could feel it, inside me, in my very soul, pressing against my thoughts, invading my mind. It reached toward me with those long, skeletal hands, and I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't escape. Then, the scraping. The sound was deafening, as though the world itself was being torn apart, and I woke up, gasping for air, my sheets tangled around me, my heart pounding in my chest. I was drenched in sweat, shivering, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't feel safe in my own skin anymore. The next day, I tried to put everything behind me. I went to work, tried to go through the motions of normal life, but nothing felt right. The sky was too gray. The clouds too low. The air too cold. Even in the warmth of the office, I could feel the chill crawling under my skin, settling in the back of my mind, like a memory I couldn't escape. I couldn't concentrate. Every time I looked out the window, I saw the faintest impressions of those footprints in the snow, though I knew I couldn't have been the only one who had noticed them. The city seemed to be holding its breath. People spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously at the sky, at the streets, as if waiting for something they couldn't name. By late afternoon, the office was almost empty. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow darker, longer. I stood at the window, staring out, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something move in the alley below. A figure. My heart leapt in my chest, and before I could think, I was already at the door, heading toward the exit, my breath shallow, the anxiety swelling in my chest. The street was empty. The air had grown colder, and the snow, which had been undisturbed that morning, was now marred by something new. There were footprints, thick, deep impressions in the snow, and they led away from the alley, toward the park. I followed them, compelled by a force I couldn't explain, as if something invisible was tugging at me, urging me forward. The wind picked up as I entered the park. It wasn't just cold, it was biting, cutting through the layers of my coat, freezing my skin. The trees bent low, the snow swirling around me like a curtain of ice. There was no sound, only the crunch of my footsteps and the distant scrape, like something dragging across the earth. The footprints continued into the heart of the park, toward the frozen lake. I stopped at the edge, my breath fogging the air, my body trembling with both cold and dread. The lake, usually so tranquil in winter, was eerily still. The surface was covered in a thick sheet of ice, but something beneath it glimmered in the low light. For a moment, I thought I saw movement under the ice, faint, fleeting, like a shadow sliding just below the surface. And then it hit me. The footprints, they were leading to the lake, and the lake was the thing following me. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, and I turned, slowly, almost unwilling to face what I knew was behind me. But when I did, there was nothing. No figure. No shadow. Only the trees swaying gently in the wind. Still, the scrape continued. Closer now. Closer than before. And then I saw it. It wasn't a person anymore. It wasn't even a thing. It was a presence, an aura of pure, freezing darkness. The outline of a figure, twisted and elongated, its limbs distorting as it emerged from the shadows of the trees. It was the same thing from my dreams, but now it was here, alive, real, tangible. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My chest was tight, and the cold was seeping into my bones, dragging me down, drowning me in an icy grip. The figure, whatever it was getting closer. I felt it now, felt its touch, icy and cold against my skin. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. The urge to follow, to surrender to it, to let it consume me. And I could hear it, its voice in my head, low, slow, as if spoken from the depths of the earth itself. You cannot escape. The curse has already begun. My mind was shattering, my vision blurring, as the figure moved closer. I thought I would die there in the snow, lost in its cold embrace, but then I ran. The snow churned beneath me as I sprinted, but the world around me had twisted. The trees bent toward me, the shadows were thick, and the scraping, oh God, the scraping was everywhere, louder, sharper. My heart was hammering in my chest as I pushed through the snow, stumbling, falling, but I couldn't stop. I had to get away. I had to escape. But no matter how fast I ran, the figure was always behind me. Closer. Closer. And then, just as I reached the edge of the park, I heard it. A scream. A voice that wasn't my own. It was calling me. My heart was a drum in my chest, pounding louder than the world around me. I couldn't hear my breath. Couldn't feel my legs beneath me as I sprinted, faster, faster, not daring to look back, not wanting to see the figure that was trailing me, its footsteps scraping relentlessly against the snow. I ran blindly, my mind a swirling fog of panic, yet somewhere deep inside, I knew I couldn't escape. Not really. The cold wind sliced through my face, stinging like sharp needles, but it wasn't the wind. No, this was something far more dangerous. The air felt thick, like a weight pressing down on me, each step harder than the last. My feet seemed to sink deeper into the snow, as though the earth itself was trying to pull me down. And then I heard it. That voice. The same one from the depths of my nightmare, now alive and present in the cold, living air. You cannot outrun what has already begun. The cold is inside you now. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But somehow, I felt its truth deep within me, seeping into my bones, freezing me from the inside out. The snow beneath my feet seemed to shift, as though it were alive, as though the earth itself had become a living thing, a thing that could swallow me whole. I stumbled, falling to my knees in the snow, gasping for breath. My head spun, my hands shaking violently as I tried to push myself up, but the ground felt different. Something was wrong. The snow was thicker here, heavier. It wasn't just cold, it was wrong. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the snow, and I felt something solid beneath it. Something hard. My heart stopped. I pulled my hand back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The feeling in my fingers wasn't just the frozen surface of the snow. No, it was something more, something that shouldn't be there. I didn't want to do it, but I knew I had to. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Instead, I reached down again, this time pulling away more snow, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The sensation beneath the surface was familiar, unnervingly so. And then I saw it. A faint glimmer of something, metal, shining through the snow. My breath caught in my throat as I cleared away more snow, revealing the cold, steel edges of a long-forgotten object. A rusted chain. A handle. A lock. It was a door. A door buried beneath the snow, ancient and untouched by time. Its surface was covered in frost, the markings carved into it almost faded beyond recognition. But I could see enough to understand this was no ordinary door. It had not been placed here by man. It was something older, something far older, something that had been waiting, hidden, for far too long. I stared at it, my mind reeling. I felt its presence even before the voice whispered again, a voice like wind howling through the branches of a dead tree. The door has always been there. It has always called to you. The curse is not on the snow, the curse is on you. My heart raced in panic as I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against the snow, the scraping sound from behind me growing louder. It was coming closer, that scraping. I could feel it getting closer. My mind screamed at me to turn and run, to leave the door, to escape whatever force had made it. But the door wasn't just a door, it was a key that had unlocked something in me, something I could no longer deny. I wasn't just being haunted. I was being drawn to this place. I was chosen. The sound of footsteps grew louder, sharper, more insistent. The scraping was all around me now, the eerie sound of ice being dragged across the ground, as though the very snow beneath my feet were coming alive. With trembling hands, I reached for the lock. The instant I touched it, a shock of ice blasted through me, freezing my fingertips to the cold metal. The world seemed to warp, to shift, as though the very fabric of reality was coming undone. The wind picked up again, whipping around me, spinning faster, louder. And then, the door began to creak open, the cold that rushed from it far more intense than the biting winter wind. It wasn't just cold, it was ancient, it was death itself, rushing toward me, threatening to swallow me whole. And then the scraping stopped. The voice was gone, but its absence left an even deeper silence in its wake, one that felt like it would crush me if I let it. The door was open now, the abyss beyond it calling to me. I could hear it in the rustling of the wind, in the hollow thrown beneath the earth. It wanted me. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face whatever was waiting behind that door. but my body moved against my will, as though something had taken control of me. My breath was shallow, and the icy air burned in my lungs. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to stop, to run, but my feet were already moving, dragging me toward that door. As I stepped through, the world seemed to bend. The world beyond the door wasn't just dark, it was pitch black, suffocating, like the heart of some forgotten place that should have stayed buried forever. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and the shadows pressed in around me, twisting and writhing. The door slammed shut behind me with an agonizing finality. I tried to turn, tried to break free, but it was too late. The figure was there. It stood in the shadows, its skeletal form outlined against the icy backdrop. The air around it seemed to warp, the darkness thickening. I could hear its breath now, deep and slow, like an animal preparing to strike. I could see it, or at least I thought I could, as the dim light from the cracks in the door illuminated its twisted, broken form. It was waiting. For me. But there was no escape now. I had entered its domain, and it had been waiting for me to open the door. The scraping sound filled the silence once more, louder, louder than before. The cold that swept through me was no longer just air, it was ice, creeping into my bones, turning my blood to slush. My body trembled violently, but not from the cold. It was fear. The fear that comes when you realize that what you've uncovered is not a place of escape, but a prison. A prison that has been waiting for the unwitting, the curious, the foolish. I was its next victim, and I was never meant to leave. I stood frozen. The silence pressed in on me, heavier than the weight of the snow that blanketed the world outside. My lungs struggled for air, but each breath seemed to freeze within me before it could reach my chest. The dark figure ahead of me seemed to loom larger, its form shifting and changing with the flickering light from the doorway behind me. I could no longer tell what was real. Was this a nightmare? Or was this nightmare real? I couldn't grasp it anymore. It moved, gliding through the blackness, its form only half visible, a collection of jagged edges and shadows, far too many for my mind to decipher. It was an entity, not quite human, but not quite anything else either. I felt the darkness thicken around me as though it had weight, pressing in from all sides. The shadows slithered, sliding over the snow in eerie ripples. The air, no longer just cold, turned alive, like something that had been waiting, watching me for far longer than I could comprehend. It was as if every gust, every whisper of the wind carried a story, 1,000 silent voices, twisted with agony, whispering things that should never be heard. I felt it then, the grip. It wasn't physical at first. It wasn't something I could touch, but I could feel it inside. It was like the cold had grown sentient, burrowing under my skin, seeping into the marrow of my bones. It was as if the very air itself had become the thing that was watching me. The shadows began to move, curling around my feet like tendrils, pulling, always pulling. I wanted to scream, but no sound left my throat. My voice had frozen too, caught in the suffocating grip of this place. "Do you hear them?" the voice whispered, faint and hollow, as though it was spoken from the depths of the ground itself. "The ones who walked here before you. The ones who tried to escape. Can you feel them in the snow?" My head spun. I couldn't move. I was no longer standing on solid ground. The snow beneath me was a mire now, a treacherous pit that seemed to breathe, to pulse with the weight of something ancient. The shadows in front of me shifted again, and this time I saw it more clearly. Its form wasn't human. No, it couldn't be. Its limbs were too long, too spindly. The way it moved was unnatural, sliding through the air without disturbing the space around it. It was as if the darkness itself had manifested this thing, as though it was not bound by the rules of the world I knew. Its face, or what might have been a face, was a grotesque amalgamation of shapes, an ever-shifting blur of dark smoke and ice. The cold stung. Not the icy cold of the world outside, but something far worse, an unnatural frost that gnawed at my bones, a frost that burned. I felt it creeping into me, curling around my heart. This wasn't a force of nature. This was something else. Something older. Much older. The door. I thought, my mind desperate for escape. I had to get back to the door. It was the only way out. I had to break free from this place. I shifted my weight, the motion painfully slow, as though my limbs had turned to stone. But when I tried to move, the shadows coiled tighter, tighter, around my ankles, around my legs. I couldn't pull away. The ground beneath me groaned. The snow moved again, rippling like water. You cannot run from what you have called, the voice taunted. It was everywhere now, crawling into my skull, scratching at my thoughts. You are already part of the frost. It has touched you. It has marked you. I wanted to cry out. I wanted to scream, to fight. But all I could do was watch as the figure drew closer, each movement slower, deliberate. It was circling me, its presence growing more oppressive, more suffocating. It was closing in. Suddenly, something cold, something sharp, pressed against my chest. Not a blade, not a weapon, but the cold. The bitter, freezing cold that didn't just chill my skin, it went deeper, it cut into me. I gasped. The cold twisted around my ribs, pressing harder, as though it was searching for something, seeking something within me. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, my chest tightening. I couldn't breathe. The shadows were pulling at me now, more insistent, as though they were trying to drag me down into the snow, into whatever dark abyss lay beneath it. And then, in the deep, suffocating silence, I saw them. Faint at first, but growing clearer, growing stronger, footprints. Not just any footprints. Frozen footprints. They stretched out before me, trailing into the darkness, each step a jagged outline in the thick ice. I couldn't tell if they had always been there, or if they had formed after the figure approached, as if the very space itself had been written into existence by its presence. They led into the void ahead of me, and I knew that they would take me deeper into the darkness, deeper into the curse. The ground trembled, a low hum that made the very air vibrate. It was like a pulse, a heartbeat, but not human, something far older, something from a time long before mine. The footprints beckoned, drawing me in with an inevitability that I could not deny. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I wasn't just in this place. I had become part of it. The figure, or whatever it was, moved closer. The shadows twisted and howled. You walk the same path as those before you, it whispered again, its voice like the scraping of ice across bone. The footsteps lead to the end. Your end. Just like them. The curse. It was never just about the snow. It wasn't about the door. It was about me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had been marked the moment I stepped into this cursed place. The snow, the footsteps, they weren't just signs, they were chains. The curse had already taken root. There was no escaping it. And then, as the ice gripped me tighter, I heard the final whisper, this time not from the figure, but from the footprints themselves. We are always here. waiting. The cold has no end. I looked back, hoping to see the door, the world I had come from, but it was gone. The cold was all that remained. The frozen footprints, the endless, stretching trail into darkness. And I was the next step. Have you ever wondered if the water remembers? That question had lingered in the back of my mind for years, ever since I first arrived in the village of Veland. There was something about this place that seemed different. No one really spoke of the past here. The locals, hardened by years of constant floods, had learned to live in a silence that bordered on unnatural. Every year, when the waters rose, the village drowned. It wasn't a metaphor. The very ground beneath our feet was once the bed of an old river, a river that had claimed the land long ago. Now, its spirit returned every spring, flooding the fields and washing through the streets, until it was no longer possible to tell where the water ended and the land began. I didn't think much of it at first. I was a stranger here, a visitor sent to study the peculiarities of these regular floods for a university project. But I began to notice things. Small things. In the morning, when the village was quiet, I would sometimes hear whispers in the wind, carried across the wet streets. There were others, elderly locals mostly, who claimed they could hear voices on the breeze, coming from the flooded areas. Some said it was the sound of old tragedies calling out from beneath the waters. The village itself felt suspended in time. Each year, the people rebuilt, they planted new crops, and they moved on. But nothing ever seemed to change. It was as if the past was somehow locked in place, trapped beneath the layers of water and mud. The first time I saw them was in the late afternoon, just as the sun was setting. The sky had taken on that eerie, half-lit hue, casting long shadows that stretched across the flooded streets. The air was thick with moisture. I was walking down the main road when I saw the footprints in the water. They weren't human. They didn't look like animal prints either. They were more like indentations, impressions in the wet earth, deeper than anything that should have been possible. They led down the main path, toward the old mill by the riverbank. The mill had been abandoned for decades, its timbers rotting in the elements, and the doors had been sealed shut for as long as anyone could remember. Yet there they were, the footprints, leading straight toward it. Curiosity drove me to follow them. The village seemed even more isolated now, as though time itself had slowed, and the world beyond had faded into nothingness. The gentle lapping of the water against the edge of the road seemed to have a rhythm, almost like breathing. It was unsettling. The closer I got to the mill, the more I could feel something shift in the air. The wind seemed to die, and everything became impossibly still. I stopped at the edge of the mill. The door, despite all logic, was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the old wood creaking under my touch, and stepped inside. The smell of damp earth filled the air, mingling with the mustiness of long-forgotten things. The floor was slick with water, and as I moved deeper into the mill, I felt a sudden chill, despite the heat of the day. It was like the temperature had dropped by several degrees in the span of a breath. There, in the shadows, something moved. I froze, heart pounding. The air seemed to grow thick with anticipation. It wasn't just the darkness that I could feel, it was something else. Something that had been waiting for me. Then I saw them. Figures, translucent and flickering, like the ghosts of old photographs. They were standing in the water, silent, unmoving. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, were hollow, dark voids. Yet, despite their otherworldly presence, there was something familiar about them. Something human. I blinked, and they were gone. I didn't move. I couldn't. A cold sweat formed on my brow, and I felt something in my chest tighten, like the grip of an unseen hand. I was no longer alone. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Ghosts? Visions? Had I imagined it? But the footprints were still there, leading into the heart of the mill. They hadn't disappeared. I wasn't hallucinating. I turned quickly, wanting to escape the suffocating weight of the place, but as I reached for the door, I heard something. It wasn't a voice. Not at first. It was more like a vibration. The air seemed to hum with an ancient energy, an energy that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. And then, through the humming, I heard the whisper. We never left. I spun around, but there was nothing there. No ghosts, no figures in the water. Just the shadows stretching toward me, dark and endless. I ran. I didn't stop running until I was back in the safety of the village, heart hammering in my chest, the sound of my footsteps echoing down the empty streets. But that was just the beginning. That night, as the rain began to fall heavily, I dreamed of the village sinking, slowly at first, then faster, until the entire place was consumed by water. I dreamed of those figures, standing in the flooded streets, their eyes never blinking, never moving. They were waiting for something. Waiting for me. And when I woke, the first thing I saw were the wet footprints at the foot of my bed. The tension in the village was palpable the next day. The locals spoke in hushed tones, their eyes avoiding mine as I passed. No one dared to mention the floods, the strange occurrences, or the things that haunted the riverbanks. They had learned long ago that silence was their best weapon against the memories that the water brought back. But not me. I had to know. I couldn't ignore what I had seen, what I had heard. There was something deep within the water, something older than the village itself, something that was trying to tell me a story. The ghosts, their tragedy, they hadn't found peace. And the more I learned, the more I realized that neither would I. The village, with its flooding streets, had been a place of death for generations. And it was only a matter of time before the water would come for me, too. The rain continued to fall, steady and unrelenting, soaking into the earth and rising slowly around the village. The heavy clouds hung low, suffocating the light, as though the sky itself mourned the centuries of lost lives buried beneath the water's surface. I couldn't shake the feeling that the water, always so patient, so calm, was watching me. And somewhere beneath that stillness, it was waiting. The next morning, the village felt heavier than ever. I couldn't explain it, but it was like the weight of unspoken secrets pressed down on everything, the very air thick with the sense that something was about to happen. I found myself walking aimlessly through the narrow streets, drawn toward the river's edge. The water had risen higher during the night, and the usual peace that came with the sound of the river was gone. The familiar murmur of the current now carried a strange, eerie quality, like it was whispering something meant only for me. I passed by the same mill, its rotting timbers now shrouded in mist. The door, which had once slammed shut behind me, now hung ajar. The smell of mildew and rot wafted from within. But there was something new. Something different. The footprints were there again. They weren't the same as the night before. These were clearer, more defined, the water having receded just enough to reveal them in full. There were no longer just impressions in the wet earth. They were distinct, unmistakable, like a person had walked here. But when I followed them, they led to the edge of the river. And there, where the footprints stopped, the water rippled unnaturally, as if it were a solid surface disturbed by an invisible force. I hesitated, feeling the familiar pulse of fear crawl up my spine. There was something not right about this, about the way the river moved, the way the land beneath it seemed to be alive. I knew the villagers had their theories, their superstitions, but as a scholar, I had always prided myself on being a pragmatist, on looking for logical explanations. Yet now, logic felt like an illusion. The more I stared at the rippling water, the more it felt like it was watching me. My breath caught in my throat when the faintest movement stirred in the water. A ripple, as though something large had just passed beneath. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the surface, trying to pierce the murky depths. And then I saw it. A figure, pale and translucent, rose from the river, its form shifting like smoke in the water. It was barely human, more an impression of a person than an actual being. But there was something undeniably alive about it, a presence that made my heart thud painfully in my chest. It didn't speak, didn't move. It simply looked at me, its eyes dark hollows of despair and longing. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But as I backed away, I realized that the figure didn't fade. It wasn't some trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. It was there. "Help me," a voice whispered, soft and distant. I turned around, but there was no one. The village behind me was as still as ever, the same dull, lifeless atmosphere hanging in the air. Yet, that voice, it felt real. It sounded real. And it seemed to come from everywhere. The figure in the water was gone now, but I could still feel its presence lingering like a shadow cast upon my very soul. The air was colder, and the wind now carried a damp chill. I was no longer alone. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something I had to understand about this place, about the water. Something buried deep within the past, something waiting to be uncovered. I walked quickly back toward the village center, my mind racing. I had to find someone who could explain. I needed answers. As I approached the local inn, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Anya, an elderly woman who had been in the village longer than anyone could remember. Her face was lined with years of worry and wisdom, and her eyes had seen too many things she was never meant to. She had always been an enigma, speaking in cryptic phrases and half-forgotten folklore. But today, her expression was different, haunted, almost. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked before I even had a chance to speak. I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. "What is it? What is happening to this village?" She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring no one was listening, then beckoned me closer. "The river remembers," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "It remembers every soul it has taken, every tragedy that has drowned. And it doesn't forget. Those who come too close, they're marked." "Marked?" I repeated, struggling to comprehend her words. "The water is cursed," she whispered. "Long ago, when the river first flooded the land, it claimed the lives of many. People drowned, their bodies lost in the depths. But their souls remain. They wait for the river to rise again, for the floods to return." "Is that what I saw?" I asked. "A ghost?" Anya's eyes flickered with a strange, knowing fear. It wasn't just any ghost. It was a remnant, one of the lost ones, still searching for closure. They cannot rest. They cannot move on. They're tethered to this place. Every year, when the floodwaters rise, they awaken. I shook my head, trying to process her words. "But why me? Why now?" Anya lowered her voice further. "The flood is different this year. It's stronger. The water is angry. It's remembering more than ever before. And if you're not careful, it will pull you under, just as it's done to others. My heart raced. The flood had already begun, but there was something more. Something darker. I felt it deep within my bones now. I had been drawn into this village for a reason, and the river had no intention of letting me leave without uncovering its secrets. "Listen to me, child," Anya said urgently, her gnarled hand gripping my wrist. "The ghosts, they're not just here to haunt. They're here to warn. You have to stop the flooding. You have to stop the curse." But how? I couldn't even fathom how to undo what had been done centuries ago. Where do I start? I asked, the words barely a whisper. "The old mill," she said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "That's where it all began. And that's where it will end." And with that, she turned and disappeared back into the inn, leaving me standing in the rain, with nothing but the rising floodwaters and the haunting whispers of the drowned to guide me. The rain didn't stop. It had been relentless for days, a torrential downpour that had turned the village streets into rivers, feeding the already swollen riverbanks. The sound of water was deafening now, crashing against the town like an endless drumbeat. The flood had only just begun, but I could feel its power, creeping in with a suffocating weight, as though the village was being slowly submerged, not by water, but by something older, something far darker. I couldn't shake the words Anya had spoken. The river remembers. There was a terrible truth in them, something that had gnawed at the edges of my mind since I first set foot in this forsaken village. The flood had come before, but this year it felt different. The water wasn't just rising, it was alive. It was aware. And it wanted something. It wanted me. I stood at the edge of the river, gazing at the churning water, trying to make sense of it. The surface, usually so calm, was disturbed, swirling in erratic patterns. I could see nothing beneath, just the impenetrable murk, but I could feel it. The water was hiding something. Something that wasn't just buried, it was waiting. I turned away from the river, my thoughts consumed by the task ahead. The old mill. That's where it all began, Anya had said. But what was it? What had started there? I needed answers, and I needed them now. The voices, the apparitions, the cold shiver down my spine, it was all connected. The village was drowning, not just from the flood, but from the weight of its own forgotten past. The path to the mill was treacherous, mud-slick and barely visible beneath the rising water. I had heard stories about the place, whispers from the villagers who spoke of it in fearful tones. The mill, long abandoned, was said to be haunted by the souls of those who had perished in the flood. But no one ever ventured close anymore. It was cursed, they said. And cursed places had a way of taking more than you were willing to give. I trudged through the muck, the water now creeping up past my boots, until I saw it looming in the mist like a dark, skeletal relic from another time. The old mill was a crumbling ruin, its stone walls half submerged, and the wheel that once powered the grinding of grain was now a lifeless husk, turning sluggishly in the current, like a skeletal hand reaching out from the depths. The air was thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. I could feel the weight of the village's history pressing on me as I stepped closer to the entrance. The wooden door, cracked and weathered, was ajar, and beyond it lay nothing but darkness. The kind of darkness that you couldn't see into. It was like it was swallowing the light itself. A chill crawled down my spine as I hesitated. The village, the river, the floods, they were all connected. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it in my bones. If I didn't enter, I would never find the answers I was searching for. And if I did, I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The silence was suffocating, as though the very air in the mill had been held captive by time. The creaking of the old building was the only sound, and it seemed to echo through the hollowed-out rooms. Dust hung in the stale air, thick and cloying. The stone walls were slick with moisture, and the ground was slick, flooded by the rising water. But there was something else too, a faint, almost imperceptible scent, something that wasn't quite right. A smell like rot, but not anything that was natural. I moved cautiously, my footfalls muffled by the dampness beneath me. The water had reached the inside of the mill, lapping against the cracked floor, and the farther I walked, the colder the air became. It was as if the mill itself was pulling the heat from my body. I was drawn deeper into the structure, moving toward a small staircase that led to the upper level. The wood creaked under my weight, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the building like a warning. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know. I had to find out what had happened here. At the top of the stairs, I found the door, half open, as though someone had been here before. It was dark inside, too dark for me to see, but the sound of the water was louder now, almost like it was calling me. And then, I heard it. A whisper. A voice, too faint at first, but unmistakable. "Help me." I froze. The voice was soft, pleading, and yet there was a sense of urgency, as though whoever was speaking knew that they were running out of time. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. And that's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the center of the room. It was translucent, flickering like a flame in the wind, but its form was unmistakable, a woman, her face contorted in pain and grief, her eyes hollow with a depth of sorrow that made my chest ache. She was staring at me, her mouth moving, but no sound came out. Only the faintest whispers that seemed to come from all around me. The air grew colder still, the temperature dropping to a near freezing point. I shivered uncontrollably, unable to look away from her. The woman's lips moved again, the words forming in the thin, frozen air. "I never wanted to die." The words hung in the air, an echo of something ancient and tragic. The room seemed to close in around me as the woman's image flickered, her form dissipating like smoke. And then I felt it. The pull. A force that dragged at me from the depths of the floor, like something trying to drag me down into the earth. It was the water, I realized. The floodwaters were beneath the mill, and they had reached up, seeking me. The woman, she wasn't just a ghost. She was a remnant, one of the souls trapped by the flood, reaching out from beneath the surface of the water, desperate for release. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The air around me was thick with the echoes of the past, the voices of those who had drowned, their lives lost to the floodwaters, their cries now woven into the very fabric of the village's history. The water was rising again, not just in the village, but within me. It was consuming me, pulling me toward the same fate. And as I turned to run, I heard the woman's voice one last time, louder now, more desperate. "Don't let the water take you." I bolted for the door, the sound of rushing water growing louder and louder behind me, drowning out everything else. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the hollow mill like a distant gunshot. The air, once thick with the stench of damp decay, felt suddenly lighter, as if a weight had been lifted, though I could still hear the faint whisper of the woman's voice lingering in the corners of my mind. "Don't let the water take you." I stumbled back onto the creaky, wet stairs, barely noticing the cold creeping up my legs as the floodwaters continued to rise in the mill's lower levels. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, as though the air itself was fighting me, trying to pull me back into the depths I'd just narrowly escaped. It wasn't just the water anymore. The village, its people, their history, was pulling me in, wrapping around my ankles like the very roots of the trees buried beneath the river. The whispers in my ears intensified. Not just a woman now, but countless voices rising from the water, mingling in an eerie symphony of sorrow. Help us. We never got the chance. Help us. I had to get out. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I reached the bottom of the stairs, but the cold, wet earth beneath me seemed to shift with a life of its own. It was as though the mill was breathing, its walls exhaling a slow, suffocating groan, begging me to leave. And yet, in the pit of my stomach, I knew I wasn't done yet. I turned, unwilling to listen to the rational part of my mind that was telling me to run. The river had been a curse to this village long before my arrival, but there was something deeper, something more personal to this. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't simply a witness. I was part of it now. I walked back toward the river, the edges of the forest on either side now barely visible through the relentless rain. The wind had picked up, a howl that seemed to be both part of nature and something else. My clothes stuck to me, soaked with the relentless downpour, but it wasn't the chill of the water that had my attention. It was the smell. That same scent from inside the mill, a sour, metallic odor that clung to my clothes and burned my throat. It was the smell of decay, but there was something more to it, something unmistakably ancient. As though the water, the mill, the village itself, had been a tomb for forgotten things. I reached the bank and stared into the swirling abyss of the river, its surface now dark and ominous. The water had risen higher, creeping toward the fields, and in the distance, I could see the faint shape of something breaking the surface. Something moving. A figure. It was a man, or what remained of one. His form was barely visible, emerging from the black depths with slow, deliberate movements. His body was twisted, as though it had been turned and contorted by the relentless pull of the river. His skin was pale, translucent, and his eyes, those eyes, were hollow, empty, unblinking. The face was familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. I had seen it before, on old photographs in the village, in the faces of people long gone. It was Thomas. He had been one of the villagers, a farmer who had died in the flood many years ago. I had read about him in the old records in the inn. But this was no man. This was something that had been corrupted by the river, twisted by the floodwaters, by the curse that clung to this place. And as he stepped forward, the water crested beneath him like a wave, his movements slow but unmistakably deliberate. He looked at me, not with malice, but with recognition. You shouldn't have come. The voice was a gurgle, a low, rasping sound that seemed to come from deep within his throat, as if the river itself had forced the words from his mouth. And with them, I felt the weight of the curse that had been placed upon this village, a curse of death and memory, of lives lost to the flood but never allowed to rest. They know you're here. His words were strained, each one like a whisper from the grave, scratching at my mind. Who knows? I whispered back, my voice trembling despite myself. But he didn't answer. Instead, the water around him began to swirl more violently, and I saw others emerge from the depths, women, children, the elderly, all of them twisted and broken in the same way. They moved in slow, deliberate steps, like figures in a nightmare, their faces empty of hope, their bodies translucent and ragged. The river had claimed them, kept them in its cold, watery grip, and now they were here, waiting. Waiting for what? I couldn't ask. The answer was too terrifying to voice. Thomas took another step toward me, his fingers outstretched, skeletal and jagged, the tips turning in on themselves like sharp claws. His breath was labored, as though the air in this place was too thick to take in. It's too late. You're already part of it. I staggered backward, my heart pounding in my chest. Panic surged, threatening to swallow me whole, but even as my feet moved, my body urged me to stop. It was as though the ground beneath me was holding me still, rooting me in place. I could feel the weight of the village pressing down on me, its past clinging to my bones, pulling me deeper into its suffocating embrace. The water at my feet surged, rising faster now, the current strong and relentless. It began to churn around my ankles, crawling up my calves, cold and invasive. The ghosts of the drowned moved closer, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams, their bodies writhing in the water as though they were part of the river's twisted cycle, trapped in a perpetual dance of death and despair. Help us. It wasn't just Thomas now. It was all of them. Their voices filled the air, swirling around me, reaching into the very depths of my mind, as though the water was trying to drown me from the inside out. I could feel them inside me, their memories, their pain, their unfinished stories, bleeding into my own thoughts. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs were no longer my own. The river was pulling at me, slowly but surely, dragging me into its icy depths. And as the cold crept higher, the darkness grew thicker, and the voices became one, an endless, terrifying chorus of the lost and forgotten, calling to me. You can't escape us. The water had risen above my knees, and it felt as though the village itself was sinking with me, pulling me down into the depths of its drowned history. I could barely feel my legs anymore. The cold had turned them numb, as though the river had begun to freeze my very blood. I looked up, but the faces of the dead were closing in. Their hollow eyes were fixed on me, expressions locked in eternal sorrow, their mouths open in wordless pleas. Thomas was still there, his skeletal hand outstretched, his eyes glazed with the unnatural calm of someone who had ceased to be human a long time ago. But even in his ghastly form, there was something deeply familiar about him, something that resonated within me, like the echo of a memory just beyond my grasp. The water was now at my waist, its icy tendrils reaching up my body, urging me downward. I took a deep breath, or at least tried to, but the air felt thick, almost viscous, as though I was trying to breathe underwater. Panic surged through me, but the current was stronger than my will. It pulled at my clothes, tugged at my body, as if reminding me that I wasn't just a witness to the horrors of this place, I was part of it. Help us. The voice was now a chorus, each voice overlapping the last, rising from the depths, filling the space around me until it drowned out everything else. I staggered forward, clutching at the muddy bank, my fingers slipping over the wet stones. I could barely hear my own breath over the deafening clamor of the voices, thousands of them, reaching for me, calling to me. You belong to the river now, a voice hissed, close to my ear. It sounded like a woman's, low and bitter. It belongs to you, the voice repeated. It always has. I swung my head toward the sound, but there was nothing there but the dark water, swirling in ever-deepening patterns. And then I saw it, something shimmering beneath the surface, something that glowed with a faint, eerie light. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, something my mind had conjured in the fog of fear. But as I stared, the glow intensified, and I realized it was a figure, submerged beneath the water, reaching up with a pale, outstretched arm. It wasn't Thomas. It wasn't any of the others. It was me. I gasped, but no sound escaped. The figure, my own reflection, was pulling itself from the depths with terrible, slow deliberation, its body twisting unnaturally as though it had been trapped beneath the water for too long. I could see my own eyes now, wide, panicked, and yet they weren't mine. There was something wrong with them, something that mirrored the emptiness of the souls surrounding me. I tried to move, but my body was heavy, paralyzed by the cold, by the sheer weight of the village's curse. "You're already one of us," the voice whispered again, this time inside my mind. It was Thomas, or the thing that had once been him, and the words carried an undeniable truth. The water, the river, knew me. It had always known me. The more I tried to move, the more the water pulled me down. It was as if the very earth beneath me had been waiting for this moment, for the return of the lost souls that had once been its caretakers. My breath came in frantic bursts as I tried to scream, but nothing came. The water filled my mouth, choked me, and I was drowning, not just in the river's icy grip, but in the weight of the past. The village was pulling me under, dragging me into its blackened heart. My mind swirled with images of the people who had died here, the children whose voices still echoed in the wind, the parents whose bodies had been claimed by the flood, their faces forever frozen in terror, their cries now fading into the murky depths. And then I understood. The river had never forgotten them. It had kept them. It had kept their pain, their suffering, their regrets, and their unfinished stories. But more than that, it had kept their rage. I was part of it now. I am part of it. The thought hammered into my skull, louder than the rush of the water, more insistent than the dead that surrounded me. And suddenly, I was no longer struggling. I wasn't fighting the water. I wasn't fighting the pull of the past. I was one with it. And then, as if in response to my realization, the water around me shifted. The surface was no longer calm, it was churning, angry, and the voices grew louder, more frantic. They were no longer whispers. They were screams. Not of pain, but of fury. I saw them now, faces emerging from the water, twisted and disfigured, their eyes full of grief, but also full of vengeance. "Join us," they beckoned. "You are one of us now." I opened my mouth, but no sound came. It didn't matter. The water closed in around me, and I felt the ground beneath my feet give way. There was nothing left to hold on to. I was falling, but not in the way I had expected. I wasn't sinking. I was rising. In the span of a breath, I was no longer standing at the edge of the river. I was in it. The world around me blurred into a swirling vortex of water and shadow, and I saw the village in flashes, its streets, its homes, the faces of its people, now all distorted, warped, and decaying. The river had always been there, and so had the village's history. Its stories, its tragedies, and its vengeful spirits. I could feel them all, we could feel them all, coursing through the water, through the land. I was no longer just an observer. I was a part of its tale. And as the river swallowed me whole, I knew I would never leave. Have you ever felt the air grow heavier around you, the moment before something shifts, just before everything goes wrong? I hadn't, at least, not until that night. I work in one of those large, impersonal office buildings, the kind that stretches toward the sky like a fortress of glass and steel. The city around it is alive, constant honking of car horns, the buzz of conversations, the ever-present hum of electricity. But inside, in the labyrinth of cubicles and conference rooms, there's always this unnatural quiet. The noise of the outside world never quite reaches the halls, and the fluorescent lights, always flickering, give everything a cold, artificial feel. It's strange, though. No matter how many times I tell myself I've adjusted to the office, I can't shake the sense that something isn't quite right. It started with the noise. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the building settling, the groaning of the walls, the usual clattering of ventilation systems. But then, it changed. It wasn't mechanical. It was too alive. It began as a faint whisper, just barely audible, as though someone had dropped a pencil in an empty room. I thought maybe it was my imagination. Late nights do that to you. But the next evening, it happened again, this time clearer, closer. The sound became a low, guttural murmur that seemed to echo through the hallways. I tried to shake it off. My colleagues were oblivious, heads down in their work, as if the office was a place where nothing strange could ever happen. But as the days went by, I started hearing it more often. The sound would rise and fall, sometimes like a hum, other times like a soft, agonized groan, as if it was coming from beneath the floorboards themselves. Then, one night, it came for the first time in full force. I was working late, the office almost deserted save for a few other stragglers in their own corners. The sound was there again, but this time, louder, more distinct. I could feel it in my bones, deep in my chest, this unsettling, piercing cry that seemed to resonate from the depths of the building. It didn't sound human. Not entirely. My breath caught. I looked around, but no one else seemed to hear it, or if they did, they didn't react. It was just me, alone in this vast empty space with the sound pressing on me from every corner. I rose from my desk, heart pounding. My office, once so familiar, felt alien now, a maze of long corridors and flickering lights. My footsteps echoed in the silence, and every now and then, the air would shift, the temperature dropping as if the building was exhaling something cold, something sinister. I walked toward the source, though something in the back of my mind told me I shouldn't. There was no reason to investigate, no rational reason to go after the sound, but curiosity and something darker, deeper, drove me forward. The lights above flickered once more, casting long shadows across the walls. The deeper I moved into the building, the more the walls seemed to close in on me. I could feel it, the tension, the unease that pressed against my skin. There it was again. The cry. Louder now. Clearer. It was unmistakably a scream, a wail of torment that seemed to drag on forever, twisting and warping into a series of jagged, stuttering noises. It echoed through the hallway in a rhythm that felt unnatural, like the dying breath of something that should not exist. The air around me grew thick, as though I was walking through molasses. My thoughts were muddled, distorted by the sound. My pulse quickened as my mind desperately tried to rationalize it. A trapped animal, maybe. A malfunction in the building systems. But nothing fit. Nothing explained the feeling of wrongness that was suffocating me. I reached the end of the hall. The sound was louder now, coming from the farthest end. A heavy door, one I hadn't noticed before, stood at the end of the hallway. It was odd. I worked here every day and had never seen it. I had never heard the noises coming from this direction. I reached for the handle, and as my hand gripped the cold metal, a wave of dread washed over me. The sensation was like ice running through my veins. I paused, my heart hammering in my chest. Something was telling me to turn around, to leave before I crossed whatever line I was about to cross. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't pull myself away. The door creaked open, the noise sending a shiver down my spine. The room was dark, but not just dark, it was deep, like a pit that swallowed light. I stepped inside, and the air felt thicker, heavier. And then I saw it. A shadow. but not one that belonged. It was dark, darker than the room itself, and it moved, not like a shadow cast by light, but as if it was its own thing, separate from the room. Its edges blurred and shifted, and as I stared at it, the scream, the cry, grew louder, more urgent, as though the thing was calling out to me. My breath caught in my throat. My limbs froze. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I had to get out. I turned on my heel and stumbled back toward the door, but as I did, I heard something else, a whisper right at my ear. A voice that seemed to echo in my very soul. "You're too late." I slammed the door shut, panting. The darkness in that room seemed to cling to me, and I could still hear the cry, but now it was inside my head. Not a sound from the world. A sound from within me. I had escaped, but had I? The air in the office had changed. The hum of the fluorescent lights felt louder, more ominous. The silence in the hallways wasn't the same anymore. It had become a presence, like something was waiting, watching. I don't know how much time passed before I left. I'm not even sure I ever fully left. All I know is that every night, the cry comes again. Louder. Closer. And I can't escape it. I never should have opened that door. The days that followed were a blur. I don't remember much of what happened at the office after that night. It felt as though I was walking in a haze, like a fog had descended over my thoughts, clouding my memory and my sense of reality. The hours dragged on in a strange, almost mechanical way, my hands moving over papers, my eyes scanning emails, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped somewhere deep within that room. The cry. That dreadful wail. It never stopped echoing in my head. I tried to act normal. I pretended nothing was wrong, but the moment I stepped into the office building, the air felt thick, heavy, as if it was pressing on me from all sides. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder now, more insistent, almost like they were trying to drown out the sound. But I could still hear it, the cry. Louder each time. It was inside me. Inside my bones. Inside my mind. I couldn't escape it. And that door that I had so desperately slammed shut the night before, it haunted me. Every time I walked past that hallway, I felt its presence. Its pull. Something deep within me told me I had to go back. That I needed to open it again. But every time I even thought about it, my heart would race and my palms would go clammy. I couldn't decide if I was terrified or if I was drawn to it. Both, I think. I started noticing small changes, too. The office, once sterile and clean, seemed to take on a life of its own. The walls, which had always seemed so perfectly straight, now appeared warped, as though they were bending toward me. The air smelled different, too. There was an earthy, musty scent, like wood left too long in the rain, mixed with something else, something metallic. Something that made my stomach turn. One evening, I stayed later than usual. It had become my habit, trying to keep myself busy, keep my mind occupied, even though I knew the cry would come again, even though I could feel it rising, throbbing beneath the surface of my thoughts. The others had gone home hours ago, and I was alone in the office, sitting at my desk, when the lights flickered above me. It was subtle at first. A slight stutter, like a hiccup. I didn't think much of it. But then the buzzing grew louder. Sharper. It felt like someone was grinding metal against metal right above my head. I flinched, rubbing my eyes, trying to focus. The noise should have been nothing, just a malfunction, a glitch, but it felt wrong. So wrong. And then it happened. The cry. It cut through the hum of the lights like a blade. A sharp, jagged scream that was so loud, so raw, that I could feel it reverberating in my chest. My heart skipped a beat and my breath caught in my throat. It was closer this time. I could feel the air growing colder, the shadows in the corners of the room stretching longer. I froze, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. The scream had come from within the office. Not the hallway. Not the mysterious room. From here. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I stood up from my desk. The sound was unmistakable now. It was human, but not human at all. It was like a cry of agony, a sound born of suffering that had long outlived its source. It was a sound that should have never been made. I turned toward the door, and that's when I saw it. The shadow. It was in the farthest corner of the room, just beyond the dim light. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A flicker in the overhead bulb. But no! It was too still, too solid. It was like a stain on the darkness itself, a form that bent and shifted in ways that didn't make sense, like it was made of something darker than night. The edges of it seemed to stretch, elongating toward me, as though it was reaching out. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then the cry came again, louder now. Closer. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound, and my chest tightened in fear. It was as if the shadow was pulling it from the very air, squeezing it into the room until I thought my eardrums would burst. Without thinking, I took a step back, my hand shaking as I reached for the door, but as I moved, the shadow shifted, blocking my way. The temperature in the room dropped, a bitter chill that nipped at my skin and made my teeth chatter. It was so cold, it burned. I backed away, stumbling over the chair behind me, crashing into the desk. I gasped for air, my mind scrambling for something, anything, that would make sense of what I was seeing. But there was no logic. No explanation. Then the voice came. Not from the shadow itself, but from somewhere deeper within the darkness. The words were ragged, barely intelligible, but the intent was clear. You're not supposed to be here. I didn't have time to process. I didn't have time to think. I ran. The shadow followed, never fully materializing, always just at the edge of my vision. I didn't dare turn around. I could hear it, feel it behind me. The cry, so loud now it rattled the walls. I reached the hallway, and it was as if the very air was resisting me. The temperature had plummeted, and the faint smell of damp earth grew stronger with each passing step. The office that had always been my safe place, my predictable, sterile workplace, now felt like a tomb closing in around me. I reached the elevator. The doors were just in front of me. I slammed the button, the sound of my frantic breath filling the silence as I watched the elevator doors slowly slide open, inch by inch. But they didn't open fast enough. The scream rose to a fever pitch, and the shadow lurched forward, just as the doors slid completely open. I didn't wait. I leaped inside and pressed a button for the ground floor, my fingers shaking violently. The doors slammed shut. I didn't look back, but I could feel it. The shadow still in the building. The cry still echoing, bouncing off the walls in a cacophony of despair. When I finally reached the lobby, the city seemed too bright. The lights felt harsh, the air too warm. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to stop. But the thing that kept me rooted there was the thought that chilled me to my core. The cry would follow me. The shadow would follow me. It wasn't over. Not yet. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even as I walked through the city streets, the bustling noise of traffic and the murmur of distant conversations seemed to fade, like the world was drowning in the echo of that scream. Every face I passed felt distant, disconnected, as if I wasn't really there. I felt like an intruder in my own life, as though the real world had slipped away while I was still trying to hold on to it. I don't know how much time passed before I found myself back at home. The weight of exhaustion hung heavy on me, my eyelids like stone. But there was something else, a pressing, gnawing dread that twisted in my gut. No matter how much I wanted to sleep, to forget the nightmare of the office, my mind refused to let me go. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city that seemed impossibly far away, almost muted. I tried to tell myself that it was over, that I had escaped. But I knew, deep down, that I hadn't. That thing, that shadow, was still inside me, wrapped around my chest, suffocating my every thought. I couldn't sleep. The room felt too small. The shadows in the corners grew too long, like they were reaching out to me, stretching and contorting into shapes I didn't want to see. It was only when I closed my eyes that I saw it. The cry. The sound that had tormented me in the office, it was now inside my head, reverberating in every hollow space of my skull. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was a presence, a living thing, curling around my mind, squeezing tighter and tighter, suffocating me. I sat up in bed, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest as my body was drenched in a cold sweat. I had to do something. The silence of my room had become unbearable, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I pulled myself out of bed and paced back and forth across the room, trying to shake off the feeling of it watching me, following me. The walls felt too close, too confining. I couldn't breathe. Why is it still here? It wasn't until I glanced toward the window that I realized it. The city outside had become eerily quiet. There were no car sounds, no voices, no footsteps. Just the silence that crawled under my skin, dragging me deeper into my thoughts. Then I heard it again. A soft, distant wail. It wasn't as loud as it had been in the office, but it was unmistakable. A sound that was at once hollow and full, as if it had been echoing through time itself, waiting to be heard again. It came from below. I couldn't stop myself. I walked to the window, my legs shaking, and pulled the blinds aside. The street below was empty. No people. No cars. Just the dim streetlights casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. For a moment, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then the wail came again, this time closer. Louder. It felt like it was coming from the alley beneath my apartment. The alley I had passed 1,000 times, unaware of the secrets it might hold. Something was down there. The air in my apartment was suddenly stifling. My breath quickened, and I felt my pulse thundering in my ears. I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair and pulled it on, the fabric heavy and foreign against my skin. I had to know. I had to confront this. I grabbed my phone, turned off the lights, and stepped out into the dark hallway of the building. The stairs creaked under my weight as I made my way to the exit, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The lobby was silent, almost oppressive in its stillness. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I pushed it open. The night air hit me, sharp and biting, as I stepped out onto the street. The faint echo of the cries seemed to surround me, coming from all directions. But when I looked around, there was nothing there. The street was as empty as I had seen it from my window. Yet the wail persisted. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was out of place. The buildings loomed over me like silent sentinels, their windows dark, their walls cracked and worn. The alleyway ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows swallowing up the light from the street lamps. I walked toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last, the darkness pressing on me, pushing me toward the unknown. The cry grew louder, its frequency rising with each step, until it felt like the sound was tearing at my chest. My breath was shallow, ragged, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run. But I couldn't. I turned into the alley. At first, it was just as empty as the street. But then I saw it. A figure. It was just standing there, bathed in the pale light from the street, motionless. The figure was small, too small to be a person, but I could make out the vague shape of a hunched form, its arms hanging at its sides, its head tilted unnaturally. I couldn't see its face, only the silhouette, distorted and stretched in the flickering light. And then it turned. The head didn't rotate normally. It jerked like a broken marionette. The eyes, if they could be called that, glowed faintly, pools of pure blackness that seemed to absorb the light around them. The figure took a single step forward. And then it screeched. The cry, louder, sharper, came from its throat, and it echoed through the alley, so violent and forceful it felt like my eardrums would explode. My body froze. This wasn't real. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my legs were heavy, rooted to the ground. The figure took another step, and then another. I could hear the scrape of its feet against the cold pavement. The sound was sickening. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. The figure was getting closer, its grotesque, jerky movements getting faster, more erratic. And the cry, that awful cry, surged through the alley again, so close now that it vibrated in my skull. I couldn't take it. I turned, stumbling backward, and finally my legs started to work. I ran. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't remember why I had stopped running, but the sound of my breath was now the only thing I could hear. Gasping, struggling for air, I stumbled back into the building, through the door I had barely managed to pull open. My feet slapped against the cold tile, echoing through the empty hallway. I slammed the door shut behind me, my pulse racing so fast I thought it might burst from my chest. But even then, the fear didn't fade. I pressed my back against the door, heart thundering, waiting for something, anything, to happen. I expected to hear it, the scream again, coming from somewhere just beyond the walls. The shadows outside had come to life, twisting like snakes in the dark, and I was caught in their deadly embrace. But there was nothing. The building was silent. Too silent. I dared to glance around, to search for some sign that I had imagined the whole thing, that I had just been dreaming or losing my mind. I was alone. The hallway stretched out in front of me, its flickering lights casting long, jittery shadows along the walls. The air felt thicker now, as if the darkness had grown heavier since I had stepped outside. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. I had to escape the weight of the unknown, the thing that haunted the city, the thing that followed me in the night. The building was suffocating, its walls pressing in from all sides. I started moving, stumbling toward the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The quiet was suffocating, like I was trapped in a vacuum, and every creak, every groan of the structure made me want to turn back, to run even further. But I couldn't. I reached the exit again. The front door stood before me, offering the same false promise of safety. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, but as soon as my fingers brushed against it, the sound came again. The cry. A distant wail, impossibly loud, as though it had been there the entire time, waiting for me to hear it. I flinched, my hand freezing in place, fingers unable to move. I thought I might lose my mind right there, in that hallway. The walls closed in. The darkness outside was growing thicker, closer. My breathing was erratic, and I pressed my back against the door again, my eyes darting to the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel them, lurking just out of sight. The cry grew louder, and then I heard it. A whisper. It was barely audible, but it was there. Soft, like the rustling of dead leaves. A voice. No, not a voice, more like thoughts, sliding into my mind without permission. You can't escape. It was cold, void of emotion, but somehow more terrifying than anything else I had heard. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, desperate for something, anything, to ground me in reality. But as soon as the screen flickered to life, I saw it. A message. It was from an unknown number, but the words were clear. Don't look back. I froze, staring at the screen. The message burned into my mind. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt it. Every inch of my body screamed at me to turn around, but the fear that had lodged itself in my chest was unbearable. I tried to ignore it. I had to get out. I had to keep moving. And so, I turned, my legs weak but moving on their own. I tried to focus on anything other than the growing terror that twisted inside me. My mind raced, attempting to force logic back into the chaos, trying to convince myself that there was nothing there. There was nothing to fear. The elevator shaft loomed ahead, its doors closed tight, as though it were waiting for me to make my move. The dim lights flickered above, casting pale, ghostly shadows. My reflection in the glass doors seemed distant, distorted, as though I were looking at myself through a thick fog. I raised my hand to the button, and just as my finger brushed it, crash. The sound exploded through the hallway like the crack of thunder, louder than a scream, louder than anything I had ever heard before. It rattled the walls, the windows, the very air around me. My heart stopped. I turned. There, in the flickering light, I saw it. A shadow. It wasn't like any shadow I had seen before. It stretched across the walls and floor, twisting like something alive, something with its own mind. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, shifting and contorting with each passing second. And there, in the center of it, stood the figure. It was the same thing I had seen earlier in the alleyway. The same hunched, jerking form, but now it was closer. Its head twisted unnaturally, its glowing eyes burning through the darkness, and it took another step forward. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the very fabric of reality was starting to tear. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. Its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and from it came a shriek, so sharp, so filled with agony, that I thought my eardrums would burst. The air trembled with it. And then, it was gone. The darkness retreated. The hallway was empty. For a moment, I thought I had imagined the whole thing. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but the figure had disappeared. The shriek was gone, replaced by the unsettling silence of the building. But I knew it wasn't gone. I knew it would never leave. The weight of the thing, that presence, that shadow, was inside me now. I could feel it, creeping under my skin, burrowing into my thoughts, filling the empty spaces inside me. I was no longer just terrified. I was consumed. I staggered back, my hands trembling, but there was no escape. I had become part of the thing I feared. The silence that followed was far worse than the noise. The screech, the cries, the endless torment, the sound of something beyond, something monstrous. But now, there was only an oppressive quiet, like the world had been erased, leaving behind the suffocating weight of awaiting darkness. I staggered back into the hallway, the echo of my footfalls loud and hollow in the desolate air. My hands gripped the railing, the metal cold against my palms, grounding me, if only for a moment. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows no longer seemed to retreat from the light. They had moved forward, slithering into every crack, every corner of the hallway. I dared not look behind me. I could hear my breath, shallow, uneven. The air felt too thick to breathe, pressing down on me as I moved. Each step sent a tremor through my chest, as though I was walking on the edge of some unseen abyss. I had to keep going. The elevator doors loomed ahead, their silence mocking me, the soft hum of the building now a distant memory. I moved toward them, my body fighting against the fear that made my legs feel like stone. The button, yes, the button, was just within reach. If I could press it, I would escape. I would get away from whatever had haunted this place, from the presence that had followed me here. But when my finger brushed the button, the silence shattered once again. A sound. A soft tap. It wasn't like a knock. It wasn't even the shuffling of footsteps. It was lighter, almost unnatural, like something unseen was moving just behind me, so close I could feel its breath on my neck. The tap echoed again, this time louder, more deliberate. And then, the whisper. Not yet. The words slid into my mind, slithering through my thoughts like the cold wind that roused the bones. It was the same voice. The voice that had whispered to me from the alley, from the darkness. I wanted to scream, to cry out, but my throat was dry. My mouth was a desert. I couldn't run. I couldn't escape. With a jolt of adrenaline, I whipped around. The hallway was empty. The shadows still stretched, long and distorted, but they weren't moving. Nothing had shifted. Everything looked the same. But then, I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, behind the flickering lights, there was someone. A figure, tall and thin, standing motionless just outside the reach of the light. I could only make out the shape, a man, but so thin, so unnaturally thin, his limbs spindly, barely more than skin stretched over bone. His head was tilted at an impossible angle, as if he had been watching me from the moment I had stepped into this place. I felt the air grow colder. His eyes glowed with an unnatural, sickly yellow light, and as he began to move, I thought I might collapse from the sheer terror that flooded through me. You cannot escape. The words were not spoken aloud. They were inside me. They were in my head. My own thoughts were betraying me. The air pressed in on me, thick with the weight of his presence. His figure swayed slightly, but it wasn't movement, it was a vibration, an energy that distorted the very fabric of space around him. I reached for my phone again, desperate to find any connection to the world outside, to pull myself back to reality. But as I unlocked it, the screen flickered once, twice, then went black. I tried again. Nothing. The man took a step forward. I could feel my pulse thumping in my throat, my limbs stiffening, paralyzed by the cold, by the horror. The darkness seemed to swell, pushing at the edges of my vision, closing me in from every side. Then, I saw it. In the flickering shadows, just behind the figure, movement. I blinked. My stomach churned. Something was shifting, something inside the man. The darkness wasn't just surrounding him, it was inside him, writhing, twisting like a million tiny tendrils. His skin stretched, distorting unnaturally as his body split open, revealing the void beneath. No. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, watching in horror as the figure, no longer even resembling a man, seemed to unravel before my eyes, its body splintering, fragmenting into shadows that tore apart and then reformed in different places. It was as though the dark was alive, feeding off the building, feeding off my fear. I had to move. I had to leave. Without thinking, I bolted. I turned on my heel and ran, ignoring the pain in my legs, the weight of the terror that dragged at my every step. The elevator was forgotten. I needed a door, an exit, a way out of this nightmare. I slammed open the nearest door, not caring what was on the other side. I rushed into a room, my hands shaking, my breath coming in gasps. It was an office, cold, abandoned, a desk in the center with papers scattered across it. The room was dimly lit, its only light coming from a single, flickering bulb above. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't breathe. Behind me, the door creaked open. Slowly. Too slowly. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I ran again, straight for the window. My hands fumbled with the lock, the cold metal biting into my fingers as I struggled to open it. I had to get out. I had to. There was a crash. The shadow. It was behind me. In the reflection of the glass, I saw it, him, in the room, standing still, but now his form was different, more broken. His limbs hung at unnatural angles, and his face, what little I could make out of it, was a mask of twisted anguish. "You can't leave." The words slithered from his lips, an echo in the emptiness of the room. I screamed, but no sound came. The glass shattered as I finally managed to pull open the window, my hands numb from the cold. I didn't look back. I jumped. The fall felt like an eternity. Have you ever wondered how many lives have passed through the same space, only to be forgotten by time? What if some of them were never truly gone? I had no idea what I was about to uncover when I stepped off the train that evening, the dim glow of the station lights casting long shadows on the cracked floor tiles. The station felt deserted, almost abandoned, just the distant hum of a broken clock and the occasional rattle of a train car outside to break the stillness. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I had been to this station countless times before, but this night felt different. There was something off. The atmosphere seemed to have thickened, pressing on me as though the very air was laden with secrets. I could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes on me, the sense that something was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe it was just the fatigue from a long journey, or the eeriness of being the only passenger in the station at such a late hour. But then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. No, not a whisper, more like the faintest murmur, a voice carrying through the empty halls. It wasn't a voice that belonged to anyone I could see, and yet it seemed to follow me. My heart skipped a beat, and I paused, straining to hear it again. Nothing. Just the soft hiss of the station's old, rattling fans. Shaking my head, I continued forward, telling myself it was my imagination playing tricks. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air felt colder as I passed beneath the flickering lights, and the shadows seemed to stretch, clawing at the walls in unnatural ways. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone there, someone who had just passed me by, or perhaps had been standing close behind. But no, the platform was as empty as it had been when I first arrived. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I quickened my pace, trying to shake the sensation of being watched. I reached the far end of the platform where the old ticket booth stood. It was closed, the windows darkened with dust, and the thick wooden counter was chipped and worn. Above it hung a faded sign that read "No tickets available at this hour." It was almost as if the booth itself was suspended in time, untouched by the years that had passed. Then I saw it. At the far corner of the platform, near the archway that led to the stairwell down to the tracks, a figure stood. A man. His back was to me, and he was staring out at the empty rails, unmoving. I froze. It was strange. The figure was too still, almost too perfect. His clothes were old-fashioned, as if he had stepped out of another time. A long overcoat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. He stood motionless, as though waiting for something. "Excuse me?" I called out, my voice cutting through the silence. "Are you okay?" There was no response. I took a step closer, my footsteps echoing loudly in the otherwise quiet station. My stomach twisted with unease. The hairs on my arms prickled, and my breath hitched in my throat. The closer I got to the man, the more out of place he seemed, like a relic of the past, a ghost caught in the present. I reached out to tap his shoulder, to ask if he needed help, but before I could touch him, he turned. The moment our eyes met, the world seemed to stop. His face was pale, almost lifeless. His eyes, though, were what unnerved me most, wide and unblinking, with a glassy, far-off stare. There was no recognition in them, no acknowledgement that I existed. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The man didn't speak. He simply looked at me, the same unblinking stare, his body rigid and still. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the figure vanished. One moment, he was standing before me, and the next, nothing. I was left alone on the platform, the silence more oppressive than ever. My breath came in ragged gasps as I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? The man, had he really been there? But no! I knew what I had seen. I wasn't imagining anything. And that's when the whisper came again. This time, it was louder. "You're not the first." The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was clear, unmistakable. And it didn't come from anywhere I could see. It was as though the sound was coming from deep within the walls themselves, echoing through the station like a forgotten memory. A chill ran through me as I realized the meaning behind the words. "You're not the first." The train I had arrived on wasn't the only one to have stopped here, and I wasn't the only one to have passed through this station. Countless travelers, lost in time, had come before me, and now they were gone. Or maybe they weren't gone at all. I began to back away, my mind racing. The figure, the voice. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong with this station. Something unseen was waiting. As I turned to leave, I glanced once more toward the corner where the man had stood. Nothing. But as I reached the stairs, I heard it again. The whisper. "Don't go." I spun around, my eyes wide with fear, but the platform was empty. Still, the presence was there, behind me, just out of view. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, my breath ragged, my mind consumed by the images of that man, his hollow eyes, and the echoes of his presence still lingering in the air. When I reached the street, the world outside the station seemed too bright, too real, and yet it felt wrong. The moment I stepped into the streetlight, the sound of the train's whistle echoed in the distance, faint but unmistakable. I looked back at the station, and for the briefest moment, I could swear I saw the man's silhouette standing in the window, watching me, waiting. I don't know what happened that night. Whether the station is haunted, or whether something darker lurks within the folds of time itself, I'll never know. But I do know this. I'll never step foot near that station again. I can't. I'm not the first. And I won't be the last. I thought the terror was behind me, but even now, every night, I hear the whispers again. It started with that first night, when I fled the station and never looked back, but the memory of that strange encounter followed me. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's ghostly face, staring at me with empty, hollow eyes that never blinked, never turned away. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just a trick of the light, a tired mind playing games. But I knew better. It's funny how the mind works, how something can seem distant and unreal, only to seep into every corner of your thoughts, wrapping around you like a fog, slowly erasing the boundaries of what's real and what's imagined. I couldn't shake it. That station. The voice. The figure. The whispers had stopped for a time after I left, but they didn't leave me. They became part of my daily routine, seeping into the edges of my thoughts like a low hum I couldn't escape. That's why I decided I had to go back. I couldn't live like this. I had to know. What had I seen? Was I losing my mind? Or was there something more to that place? I couldn't ignore it any longer. So, on the third night, I made my way back to the station. The city was quieter than usual, the streets bathed in the soft glow of distant lamps. I tried to shake off the tight knot in my chest, but the closer I got to the station, the harder it became to breathe. My steps slowed, the sound of my own heartbeat growing louder with each passing moment. I stood there in front of the old iron gates, staring at the worn-down sign hanging above, Grand Station closed for repairs. The paint was peeling, faded from years of neglect, but I could still make out the words. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't sure why I had come back. I had no plan, no idea what I hoped to find. But something told me that if I didn't go, I'd be trapped in this torment forever. The ghost, the whispering voice, it wouldn't stop haunting me. I pushed the gate open. The screech of metal against metal sounded like a warning. The platform was exactly how I had left it, empty, abandoned, and eerie in its silence. The only sound was the occasional groan of the station's aging structure, creaking and moaning as though the building itself was aware of its own decay. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and made my way toward the main hall. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and old wood, the walls covered in layers of dust and grime. The dim overhead lights flickered weakly, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. But there was something else in the air. A coldness. It wasn't natural. It seemed to seep from the walls themselves, like a presence waiting, watching, lurking just behind the fabric of the station. I could feel it, something ancient, something that didn't belong here. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. But when I turned the corner near the stairs, I saw him again. The man. He stood in the same place he had been the first time, his back to me, facing the tracks as though he was waiting for a train that would never arrive. His hat was pulled low over his face, just like before. His clothes were dark and worn, as though they had been soaked by time itself. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, the noise deafening in the silent station. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't. I had to know. This time, I stepped closer. My feet were heavy, as though they were weighted down by the very air around me. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. But something was different this time. His stillness felt more deliberate, more purposeful, as though he was waiting for something. Then, a sound. The faintest whisper of a voice, barely audible, but it was there. Come closer. I shuddered, my blood running cold. Was it him? Was it the same voice from before? Or was it something else, something that had always been here, just waiting for me to come back? I wanted to scream, to shout, to run away. But I couldn't. The voice had a pull on me, a strange magnetism that I couldn't explain. Against my better judgment, I took another step forward. Closer. And then, as if to confirm the depths of my fear, the man turned his head. Slowly. It was as if the movement was done in stages, like an old doll being pulled along by invisible strings. His face was not like any normal man's. It was pale, hollow, too thin, as if every ounce of life had been drained from him. His eyes were black, empty, infinite pits, devoid of anything resembling a soul. I couldn't look away. And then he spoke. It is too late for you. His voice was a dry rasp, hollow and distant, like it had been dragged from the very edges of time itself. His lips barely moved as he spoke, but his words hit me like a physical blow. Panic flooded my chest. I turned to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I couldn't move. The shadows around me seemed to stretch and twist, reaching out like tendrils to trap me. I could feel the coldness surrounding me, crawling under my skin, digging into my bones. I felt the air thicken, pressing in on me, suffocating me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drying out everything else. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it. There, on the edge of the platform, a faint light began to flicker, a pale blue glow. It wasn't from any of the station's lights. No, this glow was different. It pulsed with an eerie rhythm, like a heartbeat of its own. The man, he didn't look at it. His gaze never left me. You are part of it now, he whispered, his voice like a death knell. I didn't understand. What was he talking about? Part of what? What was happening? The light grew brighter, swirling in an unnatural pattern, as though it were alive, as though it were beckoning me closer. I had a choice. To step into the light and find out what awaited me, or to turn and run, leaving this place forever. But I was already trapped. And so, I stepped forward. The light enveloped me. At first, it was cool, a soft, tingling sensation that crawled up my skin like the brush of damp fingers. My heart raced, but I couldn't stop myself. Something in the air, in the very fabric of the station, seemed to compel me. The man, the ghost, stood motionless, his hollow gaze never leaving me. I could feel the weight of his stare, as though he were trying to pull the secrets from my soul. The glow, faint at first, expanded like the opening of a door, wide and inviting. It swirled on itself, and though it didn't cast any shadows, it somehow seemed to distort the world around it. The station blurred, bending under the force of its unnatural energy. I stepped forward. One foot, then the other. My body moved as though controlled by someone else. The air thickened, and I felt my breath grow shallow. The platform I stood on, no, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the cold, dusty station I had entered. It was something else. I could hear it now, the distant clatter of trains. Not the rattle of a modern vehicle, but the heavy, ponderous clanging of an old engine pulling along rusted tracks. The sound was accompanied by a muffled chatter of voices, distant, indistinct, as though from a faraway place, or perhaps a faraway time. The light pulsed again, a rhythm now, like a heart that was beating in time with my own. I tried to look around, but the world twisted and shifted with every blink. The station had changed. The walls no longer appeared ancient and decaying, but instead stood tall, worn, but with a sense of purpose, as though they had witnessed something monumental. The floors were polished, the benches newly lacquered. In the air hung a strange tension, like the calm before a storm. And then, the whispers. Not the faint, far-off murmurs of before, but clear voices, sharp as a blade, filling the space around me. They came from every direction, filling my mind with fragmented phrases. Aboard the train, a final destination. Never to return, lost in the passage of time. Can you hear it? The hum of the tracks? They've been waiting for you. The words scraped against my consciousness, like nails on a chalkboard. I tried to cover my ears, but the voices only grew louder, more insistent. I wanted to run, to escape, but my feet wouldn't move. The glow, still pulsing, had surrounded me now, and it felt as though the very fabric of reality had come apart. A distant bell tolled, its sound deep and resonant, echoing across the platform. The train had arrived. It was unlike anything I had seen before. The locomotive was massive, black, with brass fixtures gleaming under the flickering light. It looked ancient, yet somehow out of place in the modern world. Its iron frame appeared withered, as though it had traveled through centuries rather than years. The doors slid open with an eerie hiss. There was no one on board, no conductor, no passengers. Just empty, dark windows staring out into the abyss. The man's voice broke the silence. "Step aboard," he said, his tone cold, detached. "There is no going back. Once you board, you become part of the story." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to shout, to run. But the words, his voice, the pull of the light, they held me in place. Slowly, almost mechanically, I found myself moving toward the train. With each step, the whispers grew louder until they became a cacophony in my mind, drowning out everything else. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and mildew, but beneath it, there was something else, a metallic tang, like the scent of iron. I reached the train, my hand hovering over the door handle. "You cannot outrun what awaits," the man's voice whispered again. "You are already part of it." I opened the door. As soon as I stepped inside, a wave of nausea hit me. The interior was dim, the lights flickering above like dying stars. The seats were covered in dust, but there were faint, strange markings on the walls, as though someone had scratched at them long ago. The air inside was stale, heavy, as though no one had breathed it in for years. Yet, the space felt alive, as though it were waiting for something, or someone. The door behind me slammed shut with a force that rattled the glass, and I turned to face the interior. And there, sitting in one of the seats, was another figure. A woman. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her eyes wide and empty, as though staring into an abyss no one else could see. She wore an old-fashioned dress, frayed at the edges, her hair long and tangled. She looked like a ghost, but she didn't move, didn't acknowledge me in any way. "We are all passengers here," she said, her voice soft but steady, like the murmur of a forgotten memory. "We are all part of the journey, no matter how far we've traveled. I took a step back, my pulse quickening. Who was she? How could she be here? Had she been on the train this entire time? But before I could ask, the man's voice came again, cold and final. The train will depart soon. There is no turning back. The past, the present, and the future, they all converge here, in the space between the tracks. The train lurched forward. I stumbled, clutching the armrest for support, but the motion was gentle, almost imperceptible. Yet the world outside the window didn't move. The city, the station, it was gone. Instead, I saw only darkness, stretching out beyond the train's reach. The whispers continued. Louder now. Clearer. Every train has a destination. Some stations never close. Some people never leave. I wanted to scream, to beg for answers, but my voice was lost. The woman remained silent, her gaze still fixed on the window, as though she, too, had long since given up any hope of escaping. The man's words echoed in my mind, each one another shackle around my soul. I pressed my hand against the cold window, staring out at the darkness. It was then that I noticed something moving in the distance. Shapes. Figures. Shadows that flickered just beyond the reach of the train's faint light. They were coming closer. The shadows were growing longer, stretching, reaching, until they pressed up against the window, their forms momentarily visible, barely there, but unmistakably present. I could see their faces now. The faces of lost passengers. Their eyes stared at me, just like the man's, just like the woman's. Hollow. Empty. They were staring at me, just as they had stared at the station. And for the first time, I understood. I was not just a passenger. I was a part of the train, part of the journey, and I would never leave. The train continued to glide forward, its motion so smooth it felt as though time itself had become an illusion. The flickering lights overhead cast their ghostly glow, but it was the darkness outside that consumed my attention. The shadows pressed against the glass, moving, writhing in patterns too erratic to be natural. I could feel them watching me, drawing closer with every second. I turned away from the window. The woman remained in her seat, still as death, her face devoid of expression. She wasn't even looking at me anymore. Her eyes were fixed on the opposite side of the car, her lips parting slightly as if she was whispering something to the shadows outside. I wanted to speak to her, ask her what this place was, where we were headed, but my throat constricted, and the words died before they could form. The man's voice, distant, echoing from nowhere, returned to my ears. The past cannot be outrun. It cannot be forgotten. I didn't understand. My pulse quickened. What past? Why had I been chosen? What was this place, this train that didn't seem to follow the laws of time, a train that didn't appear on any map? I glanced around, searching for any sign of something familiar, but nothing looked right. There were no windows into the outside world, just that endless stretch of dark, pulsing shadows. The walls of the train car were etched with marks I hadn't noticed before. They were faint at first, like cracks in the wood, but as I stared at them, they seemed to shift, rearrange, form symbols that I couldn't comprehend. And then, I noticed the faces. On the seats beside me, across from me, in the corners of the car, they were there, not in full, but half-formed, like reflections on the surface of a dark pool, caught in the edges of my peripheral vision. They flickered in and out, faces twisted in expressions of pain, fear, or regret. Some were familiar. Others were strangers. but they all had the same hollow, soulless eyes. Eyes that looked as though they were trapped in a memory, a forgotten moment in time. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The woman still hadn't moved. The faces, though, they were getting closer. They seemed to stretch, their features distorting as they came to the forefront of my mind. A soft murmur filled the air, like the rustle of leaves or distant thunder. The whispers were now louder, clearer. This journey, it never ends. You're one of us now. I turned back to the woman, her lips still moving, but now I could hear her voice, a low, almost imperceptible murmur. I thought I had escaped. I leaned closer, desperate for answers, but she didn't acknowledge me. Her voice grew softer, more distant, until it was swallowed by the chaos of the train's hum. I thought I was free. I reached out, my hand trembling, but something held me back. It wasn't the fear. It was something darker, something within me. A sense that I wasn't meant to touch her, that I wasn't supposed to be here, at this moment, in this place. The train lurched forward again, the motion sharp and violent. My body was thrown against the seat as the world around me twisted. The shadowy figures outside pressed closer, their faces now indistinguishable from the dark itself. I tried to scream, but no sound came. Then, a voice, a new voice, harsh and raw, cut through the air. Get out! It was not the man, nor the woman. This voice was different. It was desperate. It was terrified. And for a brief, fleeting moment, I felt something else. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. I turned around, scanning the seats. The train car was not empty. The shadows had formed now, solidifying into figures. They were passengers, like me. They were still, like the woman, their faces twisted in agony, their hands clutching the edges of their seats as if they were bracing for something they knew was coming. And then, just as quickly as the voice had spoken, they all turned their heads toward me, their eyes empty, but full of some hidden understanding. The train is the end. A man whispered from the corner, his voice trembling. His face was a blur, but his words were clear, etched into the very fabric of the air. Before I could respond, the train suddenly lurched forward again, this time faster, faster than anything I had ever felt, as though the very momentum of the world was against us. The light above began to flicker violently, casting long, dark shadows that danced and spiraled across the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The figures outside, their faces now contorted in silent screams, pressed against the windows, their hands reaching for me. Their mouths opened in unison, but no sound came. The train was moving too fast, and the world outside was becoming a blur. The woman in the seat opposite me stood suddenly, her face pale and wild. She turned to face me, her eyes wide with terror. "This is it," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "The end of all things. We never escape." She reached for me, but her hand passed through mine like mist. Her body began to disintegrate, pieces of her fading into the air, her form breaking apart with each passing second. "You'll never leave," she murmured one last time before her voice dissolved entirely. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to flee, but the train wouldn't stop. The shadows outside were closing in. The whispers in the car grew louder, more frantic, as though they were all speaking at once, each voice overlapping with the next. "We are all passengers. We never leave." The sound of the train's whistle pierced the air. The station was ahead. The tracks were ending. And in the distance, I saw light, distant, fading like a dying star. But that light wasn't salvation. It wasn't a beacon. It was the end. The train was speeding toward it. I was speeding toward it. And I knew with a cold certainty that the light would not save me. It would consume me. I closed my eyes as the train roared forward, the force pressing me against my seat. The station was nearing, the figures outside growing closer. The last stop. The final destination. The end of the journey. But it wasn't just mine. It was everyone's. The train never stopped. The train screeched to a halt, the sound of metal grinding against metal echoing like a scream caught in the belly of the earth. It was almost deafening, but it wasn't the sound of the train that drowned out everything else. It was the silence that followed. A deep, suffocating silence that seemed to wrap itself around my mind, squeezing out any remnants of clarity, any thoughts that might have kept me grounded. I was paralyzed, trapped in the moment, my body a mere passenger in the chaos of the world around me. The last lurch of the train pushed me forward, my face pressed against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the station loomed before us, bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. It looked like no station I had ever seen. There were no signs, no clocks, no platforms. Just a desolate stretch of tracks, swallowed by darkness on either side. The station was waiting. And the station was watching. The air was thick with an unnatural chill. The whispers had grown quiet, but there was something else now. A hum, low, resonant, like the sound of a distant bell tolling, its vibrations creeping into my bones. The shadows outside danced, flickering and rippling like smoke, always moving in sync with the slow turn of the station's dimly glowing lights. For a moment, I thought I saw something shift in the darkness, a shape that wasn't quite human, or maybe too human. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, swallowed by the suffocating shadows. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. Then, from somewhere deep within the train, a voice, another new voice, distorted and gurgling, as if it had been drowned in water, echoed through the silence. It was so loud, it seemed to vibrate the very walls of the train car. We are all lost. You have always been lost. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a statement. It was a fact. A fact that cut through me like the blade of a knife, carving away any hope, any chance of escape. The voice was so raw, so real, it felt as though it was coming from within my own skull, echoing in the hollow places of my mind. And then I understood. The station wasn't a place for arrival. It wasn't a place for departure either. It was simply the end. The final stop. A place where those who had passed beyond the realm of the living, and perhaps those who had never truly lived, found themselves trapped, suspended in a limbo that existed outside of time. I turned back to the car, the woman now gone, her seat empty and cold. The faces that had once stared at me from the shadows were gone as well, their forms faded into nothingness. But there was still a presence here, a weight in the air that pressed down on me. The people, no, the souls of this place had not left. They were still with me. I heard the voice again, but this time it wasn't distant. It was close. Too close. There's no way back. There's no going home. I turned my head slowly, my heart racing as I felt the air around me shift. Something was standing behind me. I could feel its breath, cold and stale, on the back of my neck. The hairs on my arms stood on end. My body screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't. It was as if some invisible force held me in place. A presence, vast and terrible, settled over the train. It felt as though the entire station had exhaled, and in that breath, it had filled the train with its weight, its hunger. The lights flickered again, more violently this time, casting jagged shadows that seemed to reach for me. I forced myself to turn around, my breath shallow, my thoughts scattered. And there, in the seat closest to me, was a figure. It was a man, but not a man. His face was twisted, his features blurred, as if he were made of smoke, not flesh. His eyes, if they could be called eyes, were hollow, dark pits, swirling with a light that wasn't light. His mouth was a gash in his face, stitched together in some grotesque imitation of a smile. But it wasn't a smile. It was hunger. He leaned toward me, and the sound of his breath, raspy, wet, as though he had been drowning for centuries, filled my ears. You were never meant to leave. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My mouth moved, but the words were trapped, stuck in the back of my throat. I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing into my skull, worming its way inside, trying to claw apart the remnants of my sanity. And then I saw it. A faint ripple in the air, an anomaly that appeared just outside the train's window. Something was moving in the shadows. Something that wasn't part of the station, or the train, or even the world I knew. It was something far worse. Something ancient. It wasn't alive, yet it wasn't dead. It was beyond. The train lurched again, a violent jolt that sent me sprawling across the floor. The presence behind me disappeared, and for a split second, I felt a sliver of relief. But that relief was short-lived. The train's speed had increased again, faster than before, and I could hear the sound of the tracks beneath us bending and warping, as though they were no longer anchored to anything real. The voices rose once more, this time all at once, a cacophony of whispers, cries, and screams. Some of the voices were familiar, but most were alien, their tones sharp and broken. It's too late. You can't escape. There is no time. My chest tightened. My breath caught. I was being pulled into the station, drawn toward the looming darkness that surrounded it. It wasn't a physical pull, it was a pull on my soul, something much deeper, much darker. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the train was no longer on tracks. It was traveling through something else now, something beyond time, beyond the physical realm. The world was disintegrating around me, piece by piece, and I was no longer sure whether I was still alive, or whether I had ever been alive at all. I gripped the seat in front of me, desperately trying to anchor myself to something solid. But there was nothing solid here. Not anymore. I heard it again, the voice of the man, now a low whisper in the back of my mind. You're already here. And then the darkness swallowed me whole. The first time I heard it, I didn't think much of it. A rustle. Just the wind outside, brushing against the old, creaking windows of the house. It had been a long day of sorting through the attic, and the dust in the air seemed to make everything feel heavy. But as the hours passed, and the sound kept repeating, I felt something shift in the air, something that made my heart race. It was the same rustling sound, but now it didn't feel like the wind. It felt like something, or someone, moving, waiting in the shadows. Why hadn't I noticed it before? I could hear the unmistakable creak of old wood, as though someone was stepping carefully between the beams above. But there was no one. The house had been abandoned for years. The only thing left was the residue of its former life, the remnants of a forgotten era. And yet, as I stood there, surrounded by old trunks and forgotten relics. It seemed as though the house was alive again, waking up from a long slumber. It was then that I found the chest. I had been moving through the attic, carefully sifting through the contents of old wooden crates, when my fingers brushed against something cold. I pulled it out, an old, iron-bound chest, covered in dust and cobwebs. The rusted lock, though seemingly fragile, seemed strangely firm in its place. With a quick breath, I grabbed a nearby tool and pried it open, expecting to find old clothes or perhaps a family heirloom lost to time. But what I found inside was not something I could easily explain. It was a pile of letters. Not just any letters, these were folded in an old-fashioned, almost ritualistic way, their edges yellowed with age, the ink on their pages faded, but still legible. The paper had a strange smell to it, like old parchment mixed with something earthy and damp. The handwriting was elegant, almost too perfect, as though the writer had taken their time with every word. But what struck me was the sense of wrongness, of unease, that washed over me as I read the first letter. Dearest Marie, I fear my time has come. I have seen things in this house, strange things, things that I do not believe are of this world. I cannot explain what I have felt, but the shadows, they are growing restless. The nights grow longer, the walls seem to whisper my name. I hear them call me from below. The letter ended abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted. I looked at the date. It was from over 100 years ago. A chill ran down my spine. The woman, Marie, had she been the one to write this? Was she still alive? The thought of it lingered, but something else caught my attention. There was another letter beneath it. And another. They all seemed to be from people long forgotten, people whose names had been erased from history. But their words were filled with fear. And they spoke of the same thing, the house, the shadows, and something that waited in the depths below. I felt a wave of dizziness hit me. My surroundings started to blur, the smell of dust and was replaced by something far more pungent, something that smelled like damp earth and decay. The walls seemed to close in around me, and for a moment I thought I heard whispers, soft, unintelligible voices rising from the very floor beneath my feet. I staggered back, trying to shake the sensation of being watched. The letters in my hands felt heavier now, as though their weight was pulling me into the past. I couldn't stop reading. The next letter seemed to be written in a hurried scrawl. They are coming. The shadows have found me. I can hear them at the door. I must leave this place. Please, I beg you, do not come here. If you find this letter, do not search for me. There is no escape from what lies beneath. The handwriting was smeared at the bottom, as though the writer had been in a panic. I felt my pulse quicken as I glanced around the attic. Everything seemed unchanged, but the air itself felt wrong. The creaks in the floorboards, the rustling of the wind outside, it all seemed so alive now, so filled with anticipation. Then, there it was again. That sound. It wasn't just the wind this time. It was closer. The unmistakable sound of someone moving. But where? I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but the room was empty. Nothing had changed. Still, the sensation of being watched, of being followed, was overwhelming. As I continued to read the letters, they all began to speak of the same thing, the house, the shadows, and the depths beneath the floors. The more I read, the more I realized that these weren't just letters, they were cries for help, desperate messages from people who had vanished without a trace. The deeper I went into the chest, the more it felt like I was uncovering something far darker than I had imagined. One letter, near the bottom of the pile, was different. The handwriting was shakier, as though the writer's hand had trembled in fear. I cannot say when it will come. The house is calling me. The shadows are growing stronger, pulling me toward them. There is something beneath the floorboards, something ancient. It is watching me. And when it comes, it will not be alone. I stopped reading. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I felt as though I was suffocating, trapped in a place where time and space had no meaning. I looked around the attic, the rustling sound now louder, more insistent. It was no longer just in my head. Something was moving, shifting, just beyond the edges of my vision. And then I saw it. A shadow, stretching long and thin, crossing the floor in the corner of the room. It wasn't cast by anything I could see. It was just there. A dark shape, creeping, waiting. My heart lurched in my chest, and I took a step back, my body frozen in place. The shadow twitched as if it had a life of its own. Suddenly, the letters felt like they were suffocating me. I dropped them to the floor, but the sound they made as they hit the wood was unnaturally loud, like a crack of thunder in the stillness. The rustling sound intensified, now unmistakably coming from the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. I was surrounded. The house was alive. I had to leave. But the door to the attic wouldn't open. The handle wouldn't budge. The shadows were closing in. And in the distance, I could hear the whispers again. Louder. Clearer. They were calling my name. You should not have opened the chest. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, staring at the shifting shadows that clung to the edges of the attic. The air was thick, suffocating, and every creak of the house seemed to reverberate through me. My chest tightened with each passing second, the fear settling in deep, clawing at the edges of my mind. The rustling noise, once a distant thing, now felt like it was part of the very walls, alive, breathing, waiting. But I couldn't stop myself from looking back at the letters on the floor. They had scattered like fallen leaves, some still partially folded, others torn. I could barely make out their shapes in the dim light of the attic, but I knew that each one held a piece of something ancient, something malevolent. The shadows on the floor shifted again, stretching and twisting into impossible shapes, as if trying to pull the letters back into the depths of the chest. A voice, soft and insistent, whispered in my ear, though no one was there. You should not have opened the chest. It was a voice I didn't recognize, but one that was strangely familiar, as though it had been there all along, just beneath the surface of my thoughts. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air felt thick with it, the words reverberating in my skull, vibrating through my bones. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the feeling of being suffocated by the atmosphere itself. The attic, once a place of quiet solitude, had transformed into a claustrophobic nightmare. My pulse raced, and the darkness seemed to press against me from all sides. I tried the door again, my hands slick with sweat, but the handle wouldn't turn. It felt wrong, like the house itself was rejecting me, keeping me trapped inside. And then, amidst the growing panic, I heard it, a soft scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but as it grew louder, it became impossible to ignore. The scratching came from below, from deep within the house. It was coming from the floorboards. They are awake now. The voice, again, soft and taunting. I couldn't tell if it was real or a product of my mind unraveling under the pressure, but I felt its weight in my gut. I stumbled backward, the words clinging to me like a shadow, and as I did, my foot caught on something. I looked down. One of the letters, now crumpled and torn, had slid across the floor to rest at my feet. I bent down to pick it up, my fingers trembling as I unfolded the yellowed paper. The handwriting was the same, neat, precise, but there was something new. The words seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if they were alive, feeding on my fear. You must not let them find you. The shadows are not just in the house, they are the house. They are the foundation, the walls, the floors. They will pull you down, deeper and deeper, until you are nothing more than another forgotten voice in the dark. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I had just read. The shadows? The house? My vision blurred, and I felt myself swaying, the walls of the attic seeming to bend inward as if the entire space was warping around me. I was being pulled into something, some great, unknowable void, and I couldn't break free. I felt the unmistakable presence of something behind me. Slowly, unwillingly, I turned my head. There, just beyond the edge of the beam of light from the single bulb overhead, something moved. At first, it was just a flicker, a brief shadow crossing the floor too quickly to make out, but then it stopped. It stood there, watching me. I felt its gaze like an icy hand on my skin, cold and unyielding. I tried to scream, but my throat went dry, and no sound came out. The figure was indistinct, shifting, like smoke in the darkness. Its edges blurred and melted into the air, and yet there was something unnervingly familiar about it. I couldn't explain it, couldn't place it, but it was as though this shadow had been waiting for me. Waiting for someone to find the chest. Waiting for someone to uncover the truth. Do you hear them? The voice whispered again, this time from inside my own head. The lost ones. They are coming for you now. The past never forgets. The shadows never let go. My heart hammered in my chest as I backed away, stumbling over the remnants of the letters scattered across the floor. I didn't want to look again, but my eyes were drawn to the figure in the dark, the shadow that didn't belong, that shouldn't have been there. I could feel it moving, slowly, deliberately, inching closer with every breath I took. The attic had grown impossibly colder, and the scent of damp earth was stronger now, suffocating me. The scratching sound came again, louder this time, and it wasn't just from the floor. It was coming from all around me, from within the walls, the ceiling, the very air itself. Something was trying to break free. The shadow took another step toward me, its form becoming more distinct. I could see it now, a vague human shape, its features obscured, but its presence undeniable. There was something horribly familiar about it, like a memory that refused to fade. I couldn't look away. I reached for the nearest object, an old, rusted shovel that had been left behind in the attic long ago, and gripped it tightly, my knuckles white. My breath came in short gasps, and the voice was growing louder in my head. The shadows around me seemed to pulse, as if they were alive, drawing closer. My limbs were shaking, but I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. It's too late, the voice whispered. I swung the shovel at the shadow, my eyes wide with terror, but the moment it made contact, it passed right through it. The shadow didn't even flinch. It kept moving closer, its form stretching, its outline growing more defined. I could see now that it was no longer just one figure. There were others, emerging from the dark corners of the room, their shapes indistinct but unmistakably there. Each one seemed to hold a piece of the past, a fragment of a lost soul, a memory of someone who had disappeared long ago. And I knew them. I knew what they wanted. They weren't just shadows. They were the voices of the forgotten, the lost, and the damned. They were the ones who had been trapped in the house, their stories left untold, their fates left unfinished. And now they had found me. They had found me because I had opened the chest. There's no escape, the voice said again, this time louder, more insistent, as if it was speaking directly into my soul. The past will never let you go. The shadows closed in around me, and I knew, deep down, that I was already lost. The air in the attic seemed to freeze, thick and heavy, as though the very fabric of time itself had begun to warp around me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last, and the shadows, those terrible, incomprehensible shadows, continued to move. They were no longer just vague figures lurking in the corners. No. They were forming, solidifying, with an intent I could feel crawling up my spine. You cannot outrun the past, the voice echoed through my thoughts once more, its tone low and unforgiving. It wasn't coming from anywhere specific anymore, but from everywhere. Inside my head, in the very air I breathed, in the floor beneath me, and the walls that seemed to close in tighter with every passing second. My fingers tightened around the rusted shovel. The metal felt cold in my grip, but it wasn't a comforting kind of cold. It was the kind of cold that whispered of things forgotten, of lost souls reaching out from the void to claim their place in the world of the living. But my hand shook. I knew the truth now, the horrible truth that had been creeping up on me since the moment I opened that cursed chest. The shadows were not just figments of imagination. They were the remnants of lives that had been stolen from time, souls left behind, voices that had never been heard. They were tied to this house. To me. To this attic, where old memories lay rotting beneath layers of dust. I tried to back away, but my legs were rooted to the floor. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The shadows grew longer, reaching for me, their edges blurring and stretching, forming into shapes too grotesque to comprehend. And then, I saw it. A figure. At first, just a vague outline in the dark, but then, as though the very light of the room recoiled from it, it became clearer. Its form was unmistakably human, but its face was twisted, contorted in agony. Its features flickered in and out of focus, as though the figure itself was being torn apart by time. I wanted to scream, but no sound came from my mouth. The figure took another step forward, its footfalls silent on the creaking floorboards, its eyes locked onto mine with a gaze so intense that I could feel it seeping into my very soul. It was like being drawn into a deep, inescapable pit, where every shred of light, every hint of warmth, was swallowed whole. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling with an unearthly fear. The figure didn't respond at first. It didn't need to. Instead, it raised one hand, long, skeletal fingers reaching out toward me. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it opened its mouth, but no sound came forth. The silence was so thick, so absolute, that it made my ears ache. And then, the voice returned. The same voice that had been haunting me since the moment I touched the letters. "You must listen." The words rang in my head like an ancient bell tolling the death of time itself. They were not spoken aloud, but they filled the space around me, surrounding me, suffocating me. My eyes darted toward the other figures now, those other shadows that had been lingering in the corners of the room. There were more of them, more than I could count, each one carrying the same look of tortured remembrance. "You have unlocked something you do not understand," the figure said, its lips moving in sync with the voice inside my head. "We are the forgotten. We are the ones who fell between the cracks, lost to time. And now, you are bound to us." The shadows began to writhe, twisting and contorting as though they were alive. They were moving toward me now, drawing closer, their forms no longer ephemeral but solid, tangible, their faces, twisted, distorted and pale, staring at me with eyes that burned with an ancient sorrow. I felt the overwhelming presence of their gaze on me. I could feel the weight of their histories pressing down on me, their stories demanding to be heard. But it was not pity I saw in their eyes. It was desperation. Hunger. "We cannot rest until our stories are told," another voice whispered, one that was just a faint echo of the first. "And you will help us. You will give us a voice." I shook my head, my heart racing as my mind struggled to make sense of the terror unfolding around me. I didn't understand. None of it made sense. How could I be the one to give voice to these things? These people who had been lost in the folds of time, who had perished under mysterious circumstances, their deaths still lingering like an unspoken curse. "No," I whispered, though it felt like a plea more than a statement. "No, I can't." The figure took another step closer, its face now impossibly near. I could see the decay in its skin, the way it seemed to unravel like old parchment, its features shifting, changing with each blink of my eyes. The shadowed forms around it started to shift as well, their shapes becoming more defined, more real. "You must," the voice inside my head demanded, the pressure of it building until I thought my skull might crack. "You must listen to us, or we will make you listen." A cold hand grasped my wrist, and I screamed in pain. The touch was like ice against my skin, but it wasn't the touch of a living being. No, it was far worse, like something dead, something that had never known warmth or light. It pulled me closer to the center of the room, where the chest lay open, its contents now scattered like forgotten memories. And then I saw it. A letter. Its edges yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. It was addressed to someone, a name I didn't recognize, but the handwriting was the same as the others. A name I had seen on the old papers before. I reached for it, the world spinning around me, the shadows closing in tighter with every second. My fingers brushed against the paper, and the instant I touched it, the world around me erupted into chaos. The walls began to groan, the ceiling buckling as though the house itself was collapsing. The shadows screamed, their voices rising in a cacophony of torment. And in that instant, I understood. I wasn't just reading their letters. I was unlocking their pain. I was becoming part of their story. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and as I looked up, I saw the shadows in the shape of people, horrible, twisted versions of human beings, reaching for me, their eyes full of rage and sorrow. I tried to scream, but the air had turned thick with dread. My mouth opened, but no sound came. The shadow figures converged on me, their hands outstretched, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood the meaning of the word helpless. And in that moment, when I thought the darkness would consume me whole, the last thing I heard was the voice, no, the chorus of voices, of the forgotten, all calling out at once. "You are one of us now." I had no control over my own body anymore. I was merely a spectator to my own descent into madness. The voices, those echoes of the lost, seemed to tear at the fabric of my thoughts. It was as though every pulse of my heart was a drumbeat in their endless, mournful procession. The shadowed figures surrounded me now, closer than ever, their distorted faces twisting in grotesque expressions of longing, rage, and helplessness. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape, but it felt as though my limbs had turned to stone, my body imprisoned by something far older than the house itself. My chest tightened, and I could taste the bitterness of fear, thick and suffocating. The cold hand still gripped my wrist, its touch burning, numbing. Each second felt like an eternity, and yet time seemed to blur, slipping through my fingers like sand. I turned my head, eyes desperately searching for some way out, but the attic now felt like an infinite void. The walls closed in on me, the once familiar weight of the beams now warped and twisted, groaning under the weight of forgotten souls. The floor beneath me had turned slick, wet, as if the very ground itself was bleeding, alive with the remnants of lost lives. "You have opened the door," a voice whispered in my ear, the words smooth and cold. It was the same voice, the one I had heard before, but now it was tinged with something darker, more sinister. "And now you must face the consequences." I tried to speak, but my throat constricted, the air choked out of me. The shadows shifted, like smoke in a windless room, undulating in patterns that defied all logic. Each figure seemed to flicker between the past and present, caught in a nightmare loop, trapped in a moment of finality. The horror of their untold stories hung heavy in the air, suffocating, pressing down on my chest. A sharp pain cut through my head, and I felt the weight of centuries press against my temples. Memories that were not my own began to flood my mind, visions of other times, other places. A woman's anguished scream echoed in my ears. I saw her, standing in the same attic, only it was different then. The house wasn't in ruins. The wood was fresh, the air untainted by the ghosts of the past. She held a letter in her trembling hands, and I could see the fear in her eyes, the terror that mirrored my own. "Why didn't they hear me?" her voice whispered through the corridors of my mind. "Why didn't anyone hear my cries?" I was drowning in their voices. The flood of memories overwhelmed me, the faces of the forgotten crowding my vision. There was the sailor with the tattooed arms, his hands bound by chains that seemed to stretch into the abyss. The woman in the lace dress, her fingers stained with ink, her eyes wide with a silent scream. A child, crying out for a mother who would never return. They were all here, all trapped, their lives and their deaths unresolved, their stories never told. I tried to focus on the letter in my hand. The paper was yellowed with age, its edges torn and frayed, as if it had been through the very fire of time itself. But when I tried to read it, the ink blurred and shifted, the words sliding around like living things. The ink bled, pooling in strange patterns, until the letters formed something unrecognizable. Suddenly, I understood. The chest, the letters, they were not just relics of the past. They were anchors, binding the souls of the lost to this place, to this house. The figures around me weren't simply echoes of the dead. They were the manifestations of the unresolved, the ones who had died without justice, without closure. "Help us," a voice whispered, soft and pleading. "Tell our stories. Let the world hear our names, and we will be free." But how could I do that? How could I even begin to understand the stories of these lost souls, these broken pieces of time? I had no answers, only questions, each one leading to deeper and darker shadows. The weight of their suffering pressed down on me, suffocating, relentless. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me. I fell to the ground, the rough, splintered wood scraping against my skin. The chest lay open before me, its contents spilled across the floor in chaotic disarray. I saw the other letters scattered, their ink smeared with the weight of forgotten stories, each one waiting to be unearthed, each one a plea for release. One letter caught my eye. It was not like the others. The paper was newer, the ink darker, fresher. It was addressed to someone, but the name was smudged, unreadable. My breath caught in my throat. This letter, it was meant for me. My hands shook as I reached for it, the words seeming to pull me in, like a magnet to metal. I hesitated for a moment, but then the pull was too strong. I tore it open, and the room seemed to fall silent as I unfolded the paper. The words were clear now, written in a flowing script that was unerringly familiar. You are the key. You have opened the chest, and now you must seal it. The words burned into my mind, each one a dagger twisting deeper. My heart raced. I didn't understand. I couldn't. I didn't want to be the one to carry this burden, this weight of the past. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't brave enough to face whatever horrors lay beneath the chest. But the shadows around me began to shift again, closing in tighter, their twisted faces glowing with a terrible, eager anticipation. Their whispers grew louder, more insistent. You must do it, they demanded. You must finish what was started. The room began to spin, the walls warping, and for a moment, I thought I might lose my mind completely. But then, through the haze of fear and confusion, one thought broke through. The chest, the letters, they were never meant to be opened. They were meant to remain sealed, their stories buried, their voices silenced. And now it was too late. I had already unleashed them. The floor beneath me cracked, the old wood splitting apart like the bones of the house. The shadows surged forward, pulling me toward them, their touch freezing and burning all at once. I could feel them inside me, their stories, their pain, their hunger, all weaving together, suffocating me. You are one of us now, the voice whispered, its words like a dark lullaby. You are the keeper of our stories, and you will carry them with you forever. The chest creaked shut behind me, the latch clicking into place with an unnatural finality. The room fell silent. The shadows stood still, their faces frozen in that eternal moment of despair. And then, the house was quiet. For a brief second, I dared to believe it was over. But I knew better now. I could feel the weight of the stories pressing against my chest, the voices that would never be silent. They were with me now. And no matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, I would never escape them. The darkness had become my shadow, and I had become one of the forgotten. The weight of the letters pressed into my palms, as though the ink itself sought to sink into my skin. The words on that final, cursed page kept swimming in my mind, repeating themselves over and over like a chant that refused to die. You are the key. You have opened the chest, and now you must seal it. But what did that mean? What was I supposed to do with this knowledge, this cursed burden? The world around me had shifted irrevocably. The house, the room, even the air, everything felt warped, as though time itself had been bent in the pursuit of some unknown end. The shadows seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, stretching in unnatural ways across the walls, as though they were alive, aware of my every movement. I wasn't alone anymore. I staggered to my feet, my legs unsteady beneath me, as if they too were not my own. The house groaned, a deep, unsettling sound, like the earth itself protesting something it could not undo. I looked around, half expecting to see the figure of the woman in the lace dress standing just behind me, or the sailor's hollow, empty gaze locked on mine. But there was nothing. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, and yet I felt their presence everywhere. You must finish what was started, the voice echoed again, an insistent whisper that seemed to rise from the very walls. It was not the voice of a single soul. It was the voice of all of them, every soul trapped within this house, caught in a web of their own making. Their endless suffering was now my burden, and I could feel it deep in the marrow of my bones. I walked to the center of the room, my every step making the floorboards creak and groan beneath me. The chest, now closed and sealed, lay in the middle of the room like a tomb, its aura pulsing with the weight of the unknown. I could feel it calling to me, an endless pull, a reminder that there was still something left undone, something unfinished that could never be allowed to rest. Open it again, the voices pleaded. Open it, and all will be set right. You must free us. My hand hovered above the chest, trembling as if it had a mind of its own, unwilling to touch the thing that had brought me here. I couldn't bear to face whatever lay inside. The chest had already given me too much, exposed things I wasn't meant to know, things that had been hidden for a reason. But the pull, the weight of the voices, was suffocating. It was like drowning in a sea of memories, memories not my own. I thought of the sailor, his chains rattling in the dark. The woman with the ink-stained fingers, her silent scream. The child who had reached for the sky with no one there to catch him. They were not simply stories, not just figments of imagination. They were real, they were trapped, and now I was a part of their torment. And so I opened the chest. The latch clicked with a sound that seemed far too loud, too final. The air shifted immediately, as if something ancient had stirred. The letters inside, more letters than I had originally seen, tumbled out, scattering across the floor like leaves in a storm. The ink on each of them was smudged, faded, but the words were still legible, still burning with an unnatural light. I knelt down, hands trembling as I picked one up, its paper brittle in my fingers. I opened it, reading the words written there. You are the only one who can understand, the only one who can see us. Our fates are bound together now, in this place, in this time. The chest must remain sealed, but it can never be forgotten. I read it again, the meaning of the words seeping into my mind like a poison. The chest had never been just a container. It was a prison. And now, I understood. The stories, the voices, they weren't just seeking release. They were bound to me, bound to this house. They would never let me go, never let me forget. And just as I reached for another letter, the room went dark. At first, it was just the dimming of the light, as though the very air had become thicker, darker. But then, it was as though the shadows themselves had come alive. They twisted, they spun, reaching for me like tendrils, their movements unnatural, their forms stretching in ways that should not have been possible. I could hear their whispers, growing louder now, like 1,000 voices speaking all at once, pleading, demanding, threatening. You must help us. You must free us. Seal the chest, or we will never be free. But I couldn't move. My body, stiff and trembling, betrayed me. The shadows pressed against my skin, cold as ice, and I could feel the memories of the dead flooding my mind again, one after another, those twisted fragments of lives lost, of tragedies unresolved. Each shadowy figure that pressed close seemed to pull a piece of me with them, like they were feeding off my soul, growing stronger with each passing moment. I had no choice. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking beneath me. I had to do something. I had to end this. There was no escaping it, no running away. They were right. The chest had never been meant to be open, but neither had it ever been meant to remain closed. These souls, these voices, would never rest until their stories were told, until their fates were sealed. I looked at the chest one last time, my heart racing. The voices had quieted now, watching, waiting. There was something heavy in the air, a sense of finality, as though this was the moment everything had been leading up to. The truth was there, in the chest, in those letters, in the ghosts who were trapped with me. If I could just. I closed my eyes. And I sealed the chest again. There was a sound like the earth cracking, like the world was splitting in two. The room shook, and I felt the weight of the voices lifting, retreating, fading. The shadows withdrew, the room returned to its dim, quiet stillness. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had done it. But deep down, I knew the truth. The chest was sealed, but the stories would never end. The voices would never fade. And as I left that room, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what I had done and what I had become, I could still hear them. Faint whispers, distant cries, far off in the corners of my mind. They were always with me now, and they would never be forgotten. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.